Chapter 600. How many people are sick now? Sulan asked directly. According to the statistics, there are 603 people who came to see the doctor, the official said. Sulan's face was solemn. There were already more than 600 people who came to see the doctor. There must be a lot of people who did not come to see the doctor. Judging from the situation, the disease was contagious. If they did not quarantine and treat it as soon as possible, it would only be a matter of time before the entire city was infected. At the thought of this, Sulan did not have time to rest. He immediately returned to the city hall and called all the officials there. Your Majesty, what are your orders? Soon, a large number of officials came to the city hall. Sulan looked at them and said, when I came back just now, there were more than 600 people in the city who fell sick with a cold and fever. Didn't you know? Your Majesty, we have arranged for people to treat them. At the same time, we have ordered to buy herbs and send them to the hospital. One of the officials hesitated and said. Is that all? Sulan interrupted the official. Do you think this is a normal illness? This is a plague. A plague. Hearing the word plague, the official's face changed drastically. There had also been outbreaks of plagues in this world, and more than once. Basically, every outbreak of plagues would cause a large number of deaths. Due to the terrible hygiene standards of this world, plagues were simply unstoppable. Even strong professionals would be infected and die. During the most severe plagues, several prosperous cities were directly turned into dead cities. More than a quarter of the population died in most cities. Some cities even had more than half of the population. Professionals were physically stronger than ordinary people. Many of them had magic abilities. Their immunity was stronger than ordinary people, so the infection rate was not high. Many wizards also knew how to remove diseases and use magic to treat people. However, there was a limit to the number of people who could be treated. Compared to the huge population, it was undoubtedly a drop in the bucket. Yes, a plague, Sulan said directly. Immediately activate the emergency plan in Northern Town. Draw a quarantine area around the city and isolate all the patients. At the same time, check the entire city. Once there are signs of illness, isolate them immediately. Order the textile factory to sew 10,000 masks immediately. Let the basic staff and soldiers wear them to prevent infection. In addition, the family members of these patients, as well as the people who came into contact with them, should also be examined. Stop entering the city for now. Let the caravans stay in the camps outside the city. Sulan kept giving orders. After hearing that it was a plague, everyone became extremely nervous and hurriedly led people to deal with it. Soon, Northern Battlefront City became very busy. The news of the plague didn't spread. First of all, the plague wasn't that serious. It should be under control soon. Although there weren't many doctors in Northern Battlefront City, there were several temples here. Now that there was a plague, it shouldn't be a problem to ask them for help. As for not telling the civilians, Sulan was worried that the civilians would run away from the city if they knew about the plague. If that happened, the northern citadel that he had worked so hard to expand to more than 100,000 people would suffer a great loss. Also, send someone to invite the bishops of the various churches in the city. I will be holding a banquet in the palace tonight. Invite them to attend, Sulan said directly. Your Majesty, I will arrange for someone to send the invitations, a guard said. All right, you guys go deal with the plague. I'll go back to the Tower of Northwind and see if there's any other way. Sulan left the city hall and went straight to the Tower of Northwind. At the astrology station, you're saying there's a plague in the city? Hathaway said in surprise. Yes, I saw more than 600 patients in the hospital when I came back. They all have fever, headache, and weakness. Some have even fainted, Sulan said. It does seem to be a plague. Hathaway nodded and said, I'm sorry, Sulan, I haven't been paying enough attention to the city. Otherwise, I would have known about the plague a long time ago. It's not your fault. Sulan shook his head and said, the plague came too suddenly. There are more than 100,000 people in the city. The divine spells of the priests are not enough. I want you to do some research and see if you can make a special cure for the plague as soon as possible. All right, send a patient to the Tower of Northwind. I'll do some research and make a special cure for you as soon as possible, Hathaway said straightforwardly. As a matter of fact, Northern Battlefront City had a good environment and many buildings to reduce the spread of the disease. This made Northern Battlefront City much more resistant to the disease. If it were any other city, at least a few thousand people would have been infected by the disease. Moreover, the disease would have spread throughout the city. On Sullen's status panel, a series of data showed that there was a plague in the Northwind City. Luckily, the numbers were not very high. After Sulen issued a lot of orders, the numbers had stopped increasing. It was obvious that the measures he had taken before were effective. Sulen sent people to the hospital to find a few patients for experiments. Hathaway found a few wizard apprentices to help her with the research. Your Majesty, it's almost time for the banquet. Most of the bishops of the churches have arrived. Do you want to meet them? I'll be there right away. Sulen went straight back to the palace. The banquet hall was brightly lit, and a few high-level priests were chatting. When they saw Sulen come in, they all went up to greet him. Suluan simply exchanged a few words with them and then invited them to sit down. Your Majesty, may I know why you called us here this time? The priest of the God of Wisdom asked directly. Something did happen. Sulen took a sip of tea and continued, a plague has been discovered in the Northwind City. A plague? Everyone's face froze. The relaxed atmosphere suddenly became serious. Yes, a plague. Sulen nodded and said, but fortunately, the plague has not spread. It has been contained to a certain extent. Now I need your help to get rid of this plague. Your Majesty, we are willing to do our part for the Northwind City, the priest of the Goddess of Life said directly. Thank you so much, Sulen said happily. In return, I promise you that I can build a temple in the Deepwater port to spread the glory of the Goddess of Life forever. Thank you for your generosity. The priest of the Goddess of Life stood up and thanked Sulen. Several other priests of the temple who were a step slower expressed their willingness to help in exchange for preaching in Deepwater City, and Suluan also agreed to do so. With the help of the priests, the Northwind City suddenly had enough people. A few temples provided about 20 priests, and the doctors and wizards in the Northwind City began to treat the patients. At the same time, a large number of soldiers began to investigate the Northwind City. It didn't matter if they were slaves, civilians, merchants, or mercenaries, they all needed to be investigated. It was easy to investigate the civilians in the Northwind City. The Northwind City used the market system, and everyone lived in the market. Once they returned to the market, they just needed to close the door and investigate them one by one. As for the merchants, since they all reported when they entered the city, it was also easy to investigate them. Only the adventurers and mercenaries were more troublesome. The Northwind City had a strict management system, and all the hotels were inspected. Although some mercenaries and adventurers thought it was an offense, they could only accept it in front of the powerful army of the Northwind City. As for those who dared to resist, they were beaten up by the barbarians. They were then thrown into jail to reflect on their actions. The only problem was that the investigation had severely affected the business of the Northwind City. Many merchant groups were settled in temporary camps around the city. The Northwind City would be responsible for the food of these merchant groups. They would only be allowed to enter the city after the plague had been eradicated. The Northwind City was very efficient. After all, the Northwind City was not like the United States of America in Lin Jie's previous life, where the government did not care about human lives. They could not even settle the issue of masks after a year or two of arguing. There was no democracy here, no lighthouse of the free world. Instead, it was ruled by the cruel dictatorship of a feudal lord. Those who did not submit would be killed directly. Therefore, the entire city was soon under control. After the plague in the city was under control, Sulen began to investigate the source of the plague. The Northwind City was very hygienic, and it was completely different from other cities in this world. Sulen would not be surprised if a plague broke out in other cities, but it was unusual for a plague to suddenly appear in the Northwind City. The chances of a plague breaking out in any other city in this world were higher than the Northwind City, but it happened in the Northwind City. He planned to find the source of the plague and determine if it was intentional or an accident. The source of the plague wasn't hard to find. All they had to do was find the first patient. There weren't many infected people in Northern Town. Although they were separated into several different areas, it didn't take long for them to find the source of the plague. You said the source of the plague was brought by a few adventurers? Sulen asked with a frown. Yes, a few adventurers came to the clinic a week ago. They were all coughing, having a fever, and feeling weak. One of them was seriously injured, but their bodies are still very strong. Find out where they are and bring them back. Su Luan ordered directly. Soon, groups of soldiers began to search for the adventurers in the city. Chapter 601. Due to the existence of supernatural forces in this world, there were also some life forms that could control the plague. The most famous one was the Voodoo School. The Voodoo School was a branch of the Wizard School. It originated from the ancient shamanism. They mastered the power of the shamans and combined it with the knowledge of the Wizard School, which eventually developed into the Voodoo School. The Voodoo School looked very evil at first glance. They liked to control all kinds of disgusting poisonous insects and research all kinds of poisons. Sulen hated the Voodoo School the most. The Voodoo School wizards knew how to control the plague. Other than this school, some necromancy schools also had the same power, such as the plague zombies. These undead creatures that could spread the plague on a large scale were created by the necromancy school. It could be said that the Voodoo School and the necromancy school developed to the point where everyone hated them. It was all their own fault. This world was very rich in creatures. Other than all kinds of ferocious beasts, there were also mutant beasts, magic beasts, and so on. There were even prehistoric giant beasts living on some continents, such as dinosaurs and titan pythons. There were even creatures from other worlds that had been brought here by the ancient arcanists. Sulen was flipping through a monster illustration book. It was compiled from the newly collected information in the North Town City. He was looking at a dinosaur. It was a rainbow dinosaur. Its appearance was very similar to a dinosaur, but its skin was rainbow-colored. Its body was more than 15 meters long. It was a giant creature. Its strength was almost on par with a giant dragon. Although this dinosaur was powerful, its intelligence was not high. At this moment, a servant hurried over and said, "Your Majesty, we have found the adventurers." Sulen closed the book and asked, "Are you sure it's them? The plague spread from them?" "Yes, the chief wizard has confirmed it. They were the first to carry the plague." "Have you confirmed the source of the plague?" Sulen continued to ask. "According to the adventurers, they were infected in the Death Valley in the northern wasteland," the servant replied respectfully. "Send some people to investigate," Sulen said after some thought. The Death Valley was more than 1,000 kilometers away from the North Town City. As long as they did not go there for an adventure, it was not easy to get infected. However, it was still worth investigating. After a week of lockdown in Northern Town, the plague was finally eradicated. Even though they had lost some money, they were still happy that the plague was still in its early stages. However, other than that, the residents of North Town City had also developed some good habits, such as drinking water from the river, wearing masks, and bathing every day. After the plague was resolved, North Town City continued to develop rapidly. At the same time, a large number of merchant ships began to transport goods to Deepwater City along the Red Sand River. These goods were used for sea trade. After the fleet arrived at Deepwater City, they would also carry a large number of overseas goods to North Town City. However, the prosperous business seemed to have attracted the attention of the surrounding bandits. This time, a group of monster bandits tried to besiege the fleet and rob them. However, as soon as he made a move, he was beaten to a pulp by the guards on the fleet. After Sulen stayed in North Town City for a few days, the scouts who went to investigate had already sent back the news. No one knew what had happened in Death Canyon, but the undead monsters in the canyon had left. The entire Death Canyon became a veritable Death Canyon. Right now, the undead calamity was playing out there. Sulen, I think we should stop the undead calamity here or take care of them all. Although Death Canyon is more than 1,000 kilometers away from us, it doesn't mean it's completely safe. The undead calamity will spread all over the place, and they also carry the plague. It won't take long for it to spread here. The adventurers last time were the best warning, Hathaway said. Alright, then let's send all the undead calamity skeletons back to the underworld. By the way, we've already developed the antidote for the plague. It's very simple to make. Even a beginner apprentice wizard can make it. How much does it cost? Can we provide the raw materials ourselves? Can we supply them to the Duchy of North Wind? Sulen immediately asked. The cost is around 1 silver NAR. Apart from a few enchanted herbs, the rest are just ordinary herbs. Those enchanted herbs can be found in the mysterious realm, and the production is very high. It's more than enough for us to use, Hathaway said. That's good. Next, let's arrange for the apprentice wizards to mass produce them, Sulen decided. What about Death Canyon? Let's send some people to take care of it. As long as we don't enter Death Canyon, it shouldn't be a problem, Sulen said. Whatever, I'll take a team and go there myself. We'll settle this once and for all. Death Canyon was very dangerous. It was full of poisonous insects and man-eating plants. They needed to bring a lot of insect repellents, antidotes, and some powerful warriors. Soon, all the materials were ready. Early the next morning, a portal was opened on the astrology platform of North Wind Tower. Sulen led a group of barbarian warriors and 2 teams of archers through the portal. In the next second, they appeared more than 1,000 kilometers away from North Town City. With a familiar light, Sulen and the others appeared in a gloomy place less than 20 miles away from Death Canyon. Scouts, start patrolling immediately. The rest of you, stay alert. We'll set up a temporary territory here for the time being. Sulen did a simple search of the surrounding environment and let people set up the territory. Sulen was a little envious of Hathaway. She had Mistra's mansion. This spell was not destructive, but it could be summoned in the wild to live. Mistra's mansion was a spell that folded the space of a different dimension. It could seal a mansion in a different dimension and summon it when needed. Mistra's mansion could be said to be a necessary spell for traveling. Soon, a large number of scouts gave the collected information to Sulen. After a simple look, he began to assign tasks. You guys are in charge of this direction. I don't want any monsters to break through here, Sulen said directly. A simple map was spread out, and Sulen began to divide the areas that each team was responsible for. At this moment, an anxious shout was heard. Get the antidote, quickly. We have people here who are poisoned. A warrior shouted as he ran. Soon, an apprentice picked up a bottle of antidote and poured it in. Chapter 602. The antidote quickly took effect, and the poisoned soldier's breathing visibly stabilized. The black blood at the wound also slowly flowed out under the effect of the antidote. In just a few minutes, the blood had already returned to its original red color. Alright, it's fine now. Send him to the back to rest. It's another fine lad. After the sorcerer apprentice checked that there were no problems, he directly sent the injured soldier to the temporary camp at the back. Sulen used the earth wall spell, magic control plus change of mentality, to build a few houses in the camp. Then, he used mud to rock to turn the mud into hard rocks, and built a temporary camp here. Because someone was injured and poisoned, the other soldiers became more cautious. Something is coming. A half-elf archer warned. Half-elf archers had sharp eyes and could discover the enemy at the first moment. With the archer's warning, the others all became vigilant. Gotcha! The sound of some branches breaking came from the bushes in front. Then, a ferocious giant bear came out of the dark forest. Its tall body was like a small mountain, full of oppression. Its blood-red pupils revealed a hint of madness, and in its ferocious mouth was a row of sharp teeth that flickered with cold light. There were many red marks on its body, and the fur on it was much shorter than the rest of its body. This ferocious giant bear's body was full of bumps and hollows, and it looked like it had been casually bitten a few times. There were also some places where the fur had completely fallen off, and one could see the dark red flesh that leaked out. It was obvious that this ferocious giant bear had also been infected by the plague, but its physique was high enough to withstand the plague. The wounds on its body should have not completely healed. Moreover, after experiencing the plague, this ferocious giant bear seemed to have become more powerful than before. After seeing the group, it did not have any fear. With a low roar, it directly rushed towards the group. Its huge body was like a small mountain, and when its huge bare paws came down, even the rocks would be smashed into pieces. Frost arrow. A blue magic arrow instantly shot out from the crowd, directly hitting the dire bear in the next second. An icy blue color immediately appeared on the dire bear's body, and its originally swift movements immediately became slow and stiff. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the surrounding soldiers charged forward. 2 soldiers of the capture barracks blocked the attacks of the dire bear with their shields, while the spear in their other hand pierced out like a poisonous snake. The sharp spear left a bloody hole on the body of the dire bear. Roar! Under the pain, the ferocious bear's eyes became even crazier. Its huge bare paw viciously slammed onto the shield of one of the soldiers of the capture barracks. A dent appeared on the shield made of fine iron. The huge force caused the body of the soldier of the capture barracks to involuntarily retreat. The warrior of the capture barracks slightly frowned. The other warrior beside him seized the opportunity, the spear in his hand instantly piercing into the eyes of the dire bear. Blood splattered everywhere. The heavily injured dire bear roared, its powerful bear paw viciously slapping out, wanting to slap the human who had caused it such heavy injuries to death. However, the warrior of the capture barracks was already prepared. After his attack landed, he did not continue to fight and directly retreated. Bang! With a muffled sound, a deep imprint was left on the ground where the dire bear had just been. Ice arrow. Another blue arrow of light flew out, and the body of the dire bear was suddenly covered with frost. Its movement speed became even more sluggish. The 2 soldiers of the capture barracks seized the opportunity to continuously attack. Very quickly, the dire bear let out a mournful howl, loudly falling to the ground. After dealing with this dire bear, several soldiers dragged this big fellow back to the barracks. Although the meat of a dire bear could not be compared to a magical beast, it was still very good to use to fill one's stomach. The strength of the dire bear in front of them was not bad. A normal dire bear's strength was around rank 8, and a grand knight could deal with it. However, this dire bear in front of them had already reached the peak of the 3rd step, almost reaching the 4th step. Dire bears were originally known for their strength, and a peak rank 3 dire bear's strength was even more abnormal. This was because it had encountered Sullen's capture barracks. If a normal heavy armored spearman encountered this dire bear, even if they didn't die from a single slap, their bones and tendons would definitely be broken. After Sulen saw the dire bear's carcass, he inspected it and found that there was no plague on it. Then, he directly ordered people to dispose of it for lunch. This time, he had brought 3 teams of 60 people. Half of them had reached the 3rd step, and the rest were all rank 2. These people could be said to be the king of stomachs. This dire bear in front of them was about 2 tons, enough for them to eat for 2 days. Then, these soldiers began to divide into small groups to clear out the surrounding area. This place was only about 5 miles away from the Death Valley. There were not many monsters running out of the valley. In addition to clearing out these monsters, they also needed to clear out the plague in the Death Valley. Not only did Hathaway successfully make an antidote to the plague, but she also made a powder that could eliminate the plague and prevent it from spreading again. This time, Northern Battlefront City had made sufficient preparations to eliminate the plague. All the water sources around the Death Valley had to be sprinkled with the powder. Water sources could quickly spread the plague, and once the water sources were contaminated, the surrounding animals would all be infected. Hiss! As the powder spread, many infected animals were driven out of the valley by the powder. Then, they were shot down by the half-elf magic archers. Boom! There was a loud noise. A large tree was uprooted and thrown over. The few spear guards around it quickly dodged. Then, a giant snake tail swept across, and a spear guard who couldn't dodge in time was sent flying. The giant snake's scarlet tongue trembled slightly. Its strange dark red eyes moved back and forth. This giant snake's head alone was 5 or 6 meters tall. Its body was more than 20 meters long. The giant snake slithered quickly. In the blink of an eye, it had reached the spear guard who was sent flying. Its scarlet mouth opened wide, intending to swallow him. Lightning spear. A loud shout was like a thunderclap. It was so loud that it made people's ears go numb. In the next second, a long spear made of lightning flew out. The lightning flashed and the giant snake's head was hit. The lightning spear had an infinite amount of power and stabbed into the giant snake's head. The giant snake, which was so fierce just a moment ago, was nailed to the ground by the lightning spear without any resistance. Countless bolts of lightning exploded at this moment. The giant snake's body swayed a few times before it fell to the ground. Seeing that the giant snake was killed, the surrounding soldiers couldn't help but cheer. It was still difficult for them to deal with a monster of this level. Whoosh! 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 Sparse sounds came from the surrounding grass. A half-elf magic archer directly shot a flame arrow in that direction. The flames flew past, illuminating the surroundings. The surroundings suddenly became clear. The faces of the nearby warriors changed when they saw that under the illumination of the flames, a dense pack of poisonous snakes was rapidly slithering towards them. The large ones were as thick as an adult's arm, while the small ones were only as thick as a finger. Countless poisonous snakes covered the entire ground. Just one look was enough to make one's scalp tingle. Kerosene bombs. After seeing the large number of poisonous snakes, one of the soldiers subconsciously threw a bottle of kerosene over. Boom! As soon as the bottle of kerosene hit the ground, it shattered. Black kerosene splattered everywhere. Immediately after, a fire arrow flew over. The kerosene instantly rose into a 2-meter-tall flame. The surrounding poisonous snakes were burned to death. Seeing this, the others reacted. They immediately threw over a dozen pots. In less than a breath's time, the entire ground was covered in flames. Inside the sea of fire, a large number of poisonous snakes struggled and rolled. However, they were quickly burned to ashes. The air was filled with a burnt smell. Clean up the surroundings. Don't set this forest on fire, Sulen said after looking around. Most of those poisonous snakes will be burned to death. After a while, you guys extinguish the fire. Next, everyone set up an isolation zone around the sea of fire. At the same time, they started killing the snakes that escaped the net. Chapter 603. In the evening, everyone finished the battle and returned to the camp. Sulen summoned the magic guards to keep watch and set up some warning circles. There was no need for anyone to keep watch at night. The soldiers who had been fighting for a day began to set up a campfire and prepare food. Bah! Why does this giant python meat have a weird taste? It's disgusting. A soldier tasted the cooked giant python meat and threw it aside with a look of disgust. Sulen sniffed the giant python meat. There was a strong fishy smell on it, so he threw it aside. He then cut a piece of fierce bear meat and continued to roast it. The fierce bear meat soon emitted a tempting fragrance. Sulen took out Frodo's barbecue seasoning and sprinkled some on the meat. The aroma became even stronger. He brushed a layer of sauce on the meat and began to eat. Night fell. Sulen went into his room to meditate. The others also fell asleep. The forest was very quiet because of the killing during the day. Only the magic guards summoned by Sulen stood around the camp. The night passed quickly. When the sun rose again, the camp was lively again. After a simple breakfast, Sulen led the soldiers to the Death Canyon. Group haste. With a flash of light, everyone felt their bodies lighten, and then their movement speed immediately increased a lot. Group haste could make people run faster than a galloping horse. If it was a rogue who was good at agility, they could do even more incredible moves, such as jumping on roofs and walls, or even running on almost vertical walls. Death Canyon was very dangerous. Along the way, Su Luan led the soldiers forward. Along the way, they constantly encountered wandering undead creatures. After sensing the aura of life on the soldiers, they would immediately rush up to attack. However, most of these undead creatures were zombie beasts or ghosts. These monsters might be a nuisance to others, but they were nothing to the army of Northern Fortress City. They were easily wiped out. Although the Northern City did not send many people for this operation, their strength was not bad. A team of barbarian warriors had all been implanted with the blood of the frost giants. After transforming, his strength would be close to that of a legendary tier being. Against these tier 2 undead creatures, it would be a piece of cake. With the cooperation of the barbarians, the army of Northern Battlefront City was like a hot knife through butter. They soon arrived at the Valley of Death. As soon as they got close, a thick aura of death loomed over them. The entire Death Valley was shrouded in such an aura. This evil aura was like poison to normal people. In such an environment, they would be constantly modified by this evil energy and eventually become a degenerate with a twisted mind. There were all kinds of monsters and undead creatures wandering around the entrance of Death Valley. Su Len even saw a strange mushroom forest that was emitting a faint fluorescent light inside the valley. There were a lot of fluorescent mushrooms growing on the ground of Death Canyon. The originally dim canyon had become gloomy. Some fluorescent spores were floating in the air. When the breeze blew, these fluorescent spores would immediately scatter. Warning: the concentration of contaminated energy around the host is extremely high. Please take precautions. Warning: the concentration of contaminated energy around the host is extremely high. Please take precautions. Magic resistance. Sullen's body glowed. A wave of magic energy instantly enveloped everyone around him. The evil energy around him was repelled in an instant. Your Majesty, there's something wrong with those fluorescent spores. A half-elven magic archer reported after casting a spell. These fluorescent spores are the growth of fluorescent mushrooms. The mushrooms growing in Death Canyon are called ghost head mushrooms. They're a kind of magic herb, but their spores are highly poisonous. The half-elven magic archer crouched down and grabbed a handful of soil. He pinched it in his hand. The soil is very moist. It must have rained recently. The rain has made the Death Canyon even more humid. This kind of environment is very suitable for ghost head mushrooms. Ghost head mushrooms usually produce fluorescent spores after the rain. There were a lot of ghost head mushrooms in front of them. They were densely packed in a layer around the canyon. The outermost ghost head mushrooms were only a few centimeters tall, but the deeper they went, the bigger they became. Su Len found a lot of giant ghost head mushrooms that were almost a meter tall. While Surin and the others were observing the Death Canyon, a group of undead monsters that sensed the aura of the living rushed over. The barbarian warriors, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, swept their swords across the monsters, cutting them in half as neatly as if they were cutting chives. Wild wind. A wild wind was summoned. The storm quickly rushed into the canyon. The fluorescent spores that were originally drifting were directly swept up into the sky by the storm. A large number of fluorescent spores rushed into the sky like a giant python. Although the fluorescent spores were poisonous and could reproduce quickly, they also had a problem. They couldn't be directly exposed to the sun. The sun would quickly kill the spores. Even the ghost head mushrooms couldn't be exposed to the sun. Otherwise, they would quickly wither and die. Although it was better to use strong light here, it would also destroy the ghost head mushrooms when it killed the fluorescent spores. The ghost head mushroom was a good magic material. It was not cheap. Su Len couldn't bear to destroy so many ghost head mushrooms. Soon, the various monsters at the entrance of Death Canyon were cleared. Su Len directly led the group forward. As they got closer, Sulen found a large number of bones where the ghost head mushrooms grew. Some of them even grew directly on the bones. These ghost head mushrooms would use the corpses as nutrients to quickly grow. After the group entered Death Canyon, monsters kept appearing and attacking. Sulen ordered people to collect the ghost head mushrooms while clearing out the monsters. Who knew how many creatures were buried in Death Canyon? The entire canyon floor was grayish-white. The bones of various unknown creatures were completely mixed together. Undead creatures were constantly resurrecting and attacking. After the ghost head mushrooms were collected, the army of Northern Battlefront City continued to venture deeper into the canyon. As they ventured deeper into Death Canyon, more and more undead creatures appeared. A large number of monsters formed groups and attacked the army. Sulen quickly discovered that after a large number of undead creatures died, they would leave behind some grayish soul crystals. Although most of these soul crystals were low to mid-rank, they could still be used to create clay golems and rock golems. After discovering this, Sulen planned to establish a camp here and kill the undead creatures to collect soul crystals. With these soul crystals, Northern Battlefront City could create a large number of clay golems and rock golems for all kinds of work. Chapter 604. The Golem Factory in Northern Battlefront City was already on the right track. Now, the number of Golem army in Northern Battlefront City was limited by the soul crystals. There was a shortage of low-grade to high-grade soul crystals. The Golem Factory could operate normally because of the soul crystals Sulen collected. He didn't expect to find soul crystals in Death Valley. Sulen planned to build a base here and farm monsters there. However, before that, he had to deal with the plague in Death Valley. The plague in Death Valley contained the power of death. It was spread by the undead creatures. In order to deal with the plague, he had to find the source of the plague. Sulen suspected that the source of the plague was the ancient undead lord sealed in the depths of Death Valley. Thousands of years had passed. Even if the seal left behind by the Arcanists was still functional, it would have become unstable after such a long time. Moreover, with the arrival of the elemental tide, the undead lord would recover some of his power. The seal would become even more unstable. He could probably break out of the seal at any time. The elemental tide would affect all creatures in a material plane. However, the effect would be more obvious for powerful creatures. After all, even if the elemental tide fell, the chances of ordinary people becoming adepts would only decrease. Although the overall power of humans would decrease, the number of legendary monsters would also decrease. On the other hand, the power of powerful creatures would decrease drastically. On average, their power would drop by 3 levels. According to some records, after the last elemental tide, when the material plane fell into the lowest point of the elemental tide, the spellcasting ability of giant dragons decreased a lot. There was even a phenomenon where a dragon disciple's spellcasting ability surpassed that of a giant dragon. It was also the easiest time to slay a dragon. According to the research of the adepts, if the main material plane was not affected by the elemental tide, then the concentration of elemental energy would be at a lower level. It was like a shallow pond. It would be difficult to survive in a heavy rain. When the elemental tide came, the concentration of elemental energy would increase rapidly. It was like a full pond, and the big fish would become very strong. This was one of the reasons why legendary and legendary creatures would appear in large numbers every time the elemental tide came. Death Valley might be a dangerous place for others, but it was not dangerous for Sulen. This place was nothing compared to the bottomless abyss. Sulen led his army into the Death Valley. At this time, some high-level undead began to appear in the canyon. A bone devil was sneaking in among the skeletons. Just as it was about to launch a sneak attack, it was hit by a lightning spear. The power of the lightning spear was the best nemesis for monsters like the undead that were rich in negative energy. Lightning flashed across the bone devil's body, constantly obliterating the death energy on its body. The lightning dissipated, and the death energy on the bone devil's body completely dissipated. Its entire skeleton fell apart, and a high-grade soul crystal appeared in the pile of bones. Not bad. 1 high-grade soul crystal. Sulen gently crooked his finger, and the soul crystal was lifted up by a wave of energy and flew into Sullen's hand. Everyone, pay attention. Put away all of your soul crystals. Also, if there are any high-level undead, don't fight them. Wait for me to deal with them. Yes, Your Majesty. This is a good place. Sulan looked around and sighed. Death Valley was steep, and the valley was dark and damp. There were many places where the sun could not be seen during the day. The terrain was dangerous, and the negative energy was rich. It was not suitable for humans to live in, but it was perfect for the undead. With Sulan around, the undead creatures in the Death Valley could not stop them at all. After reaching the depths of the Death Valley, high-level undead creatures kept appearing. The most powerful undead creature was a 4th-grade lich. It was said that this kind of monster was resurrected after the caster died. It could use some spells from when it was alive, and it also had some intelligence. However, a high-level undead like the lich was too conspicuous. It was immediately discovered by Sulan as soon as it appeared. At first, he thought that it was a lich and was shocked. After taking a closer look, he realized that something was wrong. A lich and a lich did look similar, but a lich was a creature that the caster actively used the lich transformation circle to transform. A lich would have all of the memories and spells from when it was alive, and would be proficient in all kinds of undead spells. Every lich was basically at the legendary level. Most liches were otaku. They would hide in the wizard tower to research all kinds of spells and knowledge, and make all kinds of magic tools. It could be said that this kind of creature was more dangerous than a giant dragon. Most of the time, a lich's wealth was more than a giant dragon's. A lich was far from being a lich, and they were not on the same level. Before the lich could make a move, Sulan summoned a thunderbolt and struck it on the head. It was immediately struck half dead, and then it was blown up by Sulan's halberd. After the lich died, it also dropped a high-grade soul crystal. In addition to the soul crystal, there was also a white bone magic staff. This thing was useful for necromancers as it could increase the power of necromancy spells, but for other wizards, it was useless. After cleaning up these undead creatures, Sulan came to the deepest part of the canyon. Unexpectedly, there were no undead creatures in the deepest part of the canyon. There was only a building that looked like an altar, but because of the passage of time, this altar had become dilapidated. There were a lot of cracks on the altar, and death energy was constantly overflowing from those cracks. Looks like it's here. Seeing the altar in front of him, Sulan said. You guys stay here. Just one person will go over. Yes, Your Majesty. Suluan took a few steps forward and approached the altar. The altar occupied a large area, with a diameter of over 10 meters. It was entirely made of obsidian. Logically speaking, this thing should be very sturdy. However, this altar looked like a dilapidated building, as if it would collapse at the slightest touch. Even the runes on the altar that were originally used to seal the altar had become incomplete. Many of the runes had been completely corroded by the death energy and had lost their function. Basically, it's completely damaged. It can't be repaired. We can only tear it down and rebuild it. After confirming the altar's condition, Sulan's face became serious. This sealing altar had been unmaintained for thousands of years. The wizard sect that sealed the undead lord had probably disappeared long ago. But this sealing altar doesn't seem to be simple. Sulan looked around the altar for a while and made some other discoveries. He did not feel the undead lord's aura under the altar, which meant that this altar was probably not suppressed in a material plane, but a small secret realm. At the thought of this, Sulan's eyes lit up. If this was a secret realm, then there should be some good stuff inside. Soon, Sulan felt the power of space under the altar. This was a space barrier. At this time, this space barrier had weakened greatly after thousands of years. Sulan quickly found a weak spot on the space barrier. He then left a teleportation coordinate around it, broke open a space crack, and went in. Sulan's vision twisted, and the next second, he appeared in an unfamiliar ruin. As soon as he entered, Sulan felt that the surroundings were very cold. He knew that the temperature was not low, but a large amount of negative energy had gathered here. It was the human soul that felt the coldness. Warning! Warning! An abnormal radiation field has appeared around the host. The concentration of negative energy in the surroundings is too high. Contaminated energy in the surroundings. Warning! Warning! The power of the death realm has been detected. Sulen frowned slightly. This secret realm had become a death realm. This was a place that only existed in the lower planes. The death realm was an area that had been completely transformed by the power of death. Here, even ordinary corpses would be quickly resurrected as undead. What did the wizard who sealed this place do? Sulen frowned. At this moment, a strange sound suddenly came from the darkness. Then, a bone spear instantly shot out, like a sharp sword, and pierced towards Sulen. Bang! Sulen's arm moved slightly, and the storm battle halberd appeared in front of him. The blade of the halberd moved slightly, and directly cut the bone spear in half. What's that? Some black shadows appeared in front of Sulen. They looked like humanoid creatures. They were tall and strong, and the surface of their bodies seemed to be covered by a black armor. The armor was completely black, and even the face was covered by a helmet. In their hands, there was a long sword surrounded by a strong aura of death. They looked like heavy knights wearing knight's armor. Death Knights? After seeing the appearance of these monsters, Sulen immediately recognized them. Death Knights were very powerful undead creatures. It was said that only the corpse of a high-grade knight could transform them. The strength of each Death Knight was at least grade 3, and most of them were grade 4. This kind of undead creature was said to be the most powerful undead creature below the legendary level. It was also the favorite troop of all undead lords. It was the strongest undead creature other than the bone dragon. Under normal circumstances, undead creatures would give people the impression that they were numerous and weak. For example, the lowest grade undead creatures, skeletons and zombies, moved slowly, had no command, and had obvious weaknesses. As long as one could resist the fear in one's heart, these undead creatures could be easily killed. However, Death Knights were completely different. These high-grade undead creatures had no weaknesses, no pain, strong attack power, and strong defense. They had simple intelligence and discipline. They were one of the few undead creatures that could form groups on their own. They were the most powerful undead army of the undead lords. Chapter 605. Lightning Spear. 5 Lightning Whips. Thunderstorm. After seeing this undead knight, Sulen immediately released a large number of lightning spells. Lightning spells dealt extra damage to the undead. In fact, the most damaging spells to the undead were the holy light spells, followed by lightning and fire. Normal undead were easy to deal with, but high-level undead were different. This was especially true for this kind of undead knights. They had no fear, no pain, no hunger, no fatigue, and no fear of death. They were proficient in all kinds of battle techniques and were very disciplined. They were almost born for battle. Even legendary wizards would find it difficult to kill them in one go. Now that they were in an environment like the land of the dead, their recovery speed was increased. If a legendary wizard encountered such a situation, it would be difficult to deal with these Death Knights. However, they encountered Sulen, who had already surpassed the high-grade legends and became the lowest-grade astral explorer. The number of legends who died in his hands was more than 2 hands, let alone these Death Knights who had yet to reach the legendary level. Sulen waved his storm battle halberd and rushed up in an instant. Dazzling lightning struck the undead knight at the front with the halberd. Endless lightning exploded at this moment, and the powerful lightning directly tore the undead knight's armor apart. A large amount of black death energy quickly dissipated like melting snow. The sharp blade of the halberd directly cut the undead knight in half along with its weapon. Even the undead warhorse under it was covered in lightning. Sulen was very fast, and the storm battle halberd was at full power. Dazzling lightning swept across the area, and the undead knights that rushed up could not fight back at all under Sulen's attack. More than a dozen undead knights were quickly covered in lightning. The endless lightning dissipated, and all of the undead knights turned into a pile of bones. In addition to these, there were more than a dozen high-level soul crystals. What a treasure land! I got more than a dozen high-level soul crystals in such a short time. It's faster than the abyss. Sulen put away the soul crystals and continued to walk deeper into the secret realm. This secret realm was unexpectedly desolate. The soil beneath his feet seemed to have been contaminated by the power of death, turning into a sickly grayish white. This was a sign that the soil had completely lost its nutrients. In the depths of the secret realm, a dense power of death circled around. That should be the true place where the undead lord was sealed. After dealing with the undead knights, the rest of the journey was very quiet. No other undead creatures appeared, which was obviously very abnormal. After all, this was a land of the dead, and the surroundings were so clean that there was not even a ghost. Sulen cast a defensive spell on himself and quickly advanced toward the central area. After walking for a quarter of an hour, a palace made of black rocks appeared in the distance. The construction of the palace was very grand, and the entire palace was made of huge rocks. Stone pillars more than a meter in diameter supported a huge dome. The entire palace was similar to the Parthenon temple in his previous life. It looked very spectacular. Although it had been there for several millennia, the palace was still very well preserved. At this moment, the entire palace was shrouded in an evil energy field. The runic array that was originally used to seal the palace had been infected by this evil energy field and was on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, the palace was shrouded in an almost corporeal death energy. Sulen extended his left hand and made a grabbing motion toward the palace. Dazzling lightning suddenly appeared, and the power of lightning directly broke through the evil energy field. The lightning flashed, and in the next second, Sulen had already entered the palace. The palace was empty, as if everything had been taken away when it was sealed. A large number of runes were engraved on the floor under his feet. The patterns that Sulen had thought were patterns on the walls were actually runes. These runes and the runes under his feet formed a runic array. The palace was completely a prison. After passing through the corridor, Sulen arrived at the center of the palace. Soon, a figure covered in a black robe appeared before him. His body was emitting a shocking death energy, and an evil energy field spread out from his body. He had a ferocious and twisted face. Under the corrosion of the death energy, his flesh had already dried up, leaving only some dry skin clinging to his face, making him look like a skeleton. His 2 arms had turned into sharp claws, and they were emitting a thick black gas and a plague aura. They looked ferocious and terrifying. When Sulen appeared, he slowly raised his head, and his eyes flashed with a strange red light. He stared at Sulen and muttered, "Soul." Flesh. The sharp claws suddenly disappeared and reappeared in front of Sulen in an instant, grabbing at him fiercely. They carried a shocking death energy, and the sharp claws actually appeared in front of Sulen through space. Bam! Lightning exploded, and the dazzling power of lightning spread out. The monster's sharp claws were directly blown apart, and the death energy on them was also blown away. However, before Sulen could catch his breath, another sharp claw appeared in front of Sulen and instantly hit the energy barrier in front of Sulen. The originally sturdy energy barrier instantly flashed with lightning, and the power of lightning and death continued to clash. Accompanied by the lightning, Sulen's storm battle halberd swept across, and with a loud clang, the sharp claws were directly sent flying. Flesh. Fresh blood and flesh. I'm going to swallow you. The undead lord in front of him still maintained his human form, and his expression was blank and empty. However, there was a palpitating sense of fear. Fear shock. An evil spiritual light instantly exploded, and Sulen's mind was shaken. A sense of fear rose in his heart, but in an instant, this fear disappeared without a trace. Sulen's toughness and soul resistance were extraordinarily high, and on top of that, his iron will was at the legendary level. The fear shock of the undead lord in front of him was not enough to hurt him. Thunder slash. Sulen's body was covered in lightning, and he directly activated the thunder territory. The evil energy force field that was originally surrounding him was directly broken by the thunder territory, and a powerful lightning energy filled the surrounding space. The dazzling lightning smashed down fiercely, and the storm battle halberd instantly hit the undead lord. Lightning scattered in all directions, and a series of sizzling sounds were heard. The power of lightning and death were constantly being worn down. The undead lord was directly sent flying by Sullen's huge force. Ah! The rich power of death instantly exploded, and completely obliterated the power of lightning on its body. This attack was not ineffective, and the power of lightning was still very damaging to it. The shriveled and terrifying face of the undead lord in front of him was scorched black by the power of lightning, and his eyes, nose, and mouth could no longer be seen. Then, an even larger and more twisted figure appeared from its body. It was an extremely ugly soul, and countless human faces appeared on the soul. They kept appearing and disappearing, and waves of soul wails and screams were heard. Tentacles made completely of the power of death kept appearing, and with the spread of the evil territory, a large number of tentacles of evil energy fiercely whipped at Sulen in an instant. Soul-binding zombie demon. Sulen finally remembered the name of this undead lord. This was a soul-binding zombie demon. Boom! A loud thunder sounded, and then countless bolts of lightning exploded from Sullen's body. All the tentacles of evil energy all turned into black gas after hitting the lightning. The lightning and the power of death collided quickly. At this moment, a pitch-black energy spike suddenly appeared behind Sulen, and then it instantly broke through the energy shield on Sullen's body, and was about to penetrate his back in the next moment. Spell sequence activate. Flash. Thunderstorm. Spear of lightning. The moment the energy shield broke, Sullen's body flashed, and his whole body disappeared in an instant. Then, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky, and instantly hit the soul-binding zombie demon. Then, another spear of lightning shot out, and instantly shot at the soul-binding zombie demon. But at this moment, the soul-binding zombie demon flashed with evil energy, and the next second, it appeared beside Sulen, and its pair of ferocious claws grabbed at him again. Bang! 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 Without thinking, Sulen quickly attacked with the Storm War Halberd. The Storm War Halberd carried the powerful power of lightning and kept attacking. The soul-binding zombie demon's ability was very strange, but its strength was far lower than Sullen's. But this time, it wanted to fight Sulen in close combat. When it came to close combat, Sulen was not afraid of anyone. Endless lightning enveloped Sullen's body, and flashes of lightning kept flashing. The Storm War Halberd kept hacking at the soul-binding zombie demon's body. The soul-binding zombie demon's shriveled body kept retreating, and the lightning kept entangling it. Soon, the shroud on the soul-binding zombie demon's body was torn apart, and finally, after another heavy hack, the shroud on the soul-binding zombie demon's body was completely broken. Under the dazzling lightning, it instantly shattered into countless pieces, and the body under the shroud appeared before Sullen's eyes. It was a completely shriveled human corpse. In the battle just now, the flesh had been torn apart, revealing the black bones inside. Sulen waved the Storm War Halberd in his hand, creating a series of phantoms. The Storm War Halberd seemed to have turned into a dozen at this moment, and the continuous attacks forced the soul-binding zombie demon's big sister to retreat. Roar! The soul-binding zombie demon roared, and a strong evil energy erupted from its body, causing Sullen's attack to pause for a moment. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the soul-binding zombie demon instantly activated its teleportation ability, trying to distance itself from Sulen. But just as it disappeared, Sulen also activated Flash and chased after it again. The dazzling lightning lit up the entire palace. The palace was not big. The soul-binding zombie demon kept flashing and attacking, and Sulen kept flashing and chasing after it. Both of them teleported very quickly, and the entire space seemed to be covered by lightning. Chapter 606. The necromancer kept retreating. If it wasn't an undead creature, it would have been killed long ago. In an environment like the land of the dead, the necromancer was very powerful. The death force around it was constantly replenishing it. This allowed it to recover very quickly. After being suppressed by Su Len for a while, the necromancer suddenly became violent. A dazzling black light exploded from its body and pushed away Su Len, who was attacking. Then, the death force condensed into countless sharp arrows and pierced toward Su Len. It was just that after Su Luan's spellcasting ability entered the legendary level, he could use flash at will, so it was not easy to attack him. The battle between the two sides could only capture the constantly crisscrossing black light and thunder. Others could not do this at all. Legendary wizards could teleport continuously for a short period of time, but their close combat ability was much weaker than Sullen's. Only Su Len could use this method to fight. Expose weakness. Greater haste. A few beams of light rose from Sullen's body. After dodging the attack, Su Len casually cast a spell on himself and continued to attack. Dazzling lightning flashed, and Su Len instantly appeared behind the necromancer. More than 50 points of strength were fully activated, and the shocking power formed a strong wind pressure. Accompanied by a flash of lightning, Su Len slashed toward the abomination in front of him with all his strength. Clang! A shocking wave of energy instantly exploded, and a crack appeared on the claws of the necromancer that was blocking in front of the necromancer. This crack gradually expanded, and finally, the sharp claws of the necromancer were completely broken. The storm battle halberd left a deep wound on the necromancer's body with endless lightning. Sullen's full power quickly suppressed the necromancer. Even in an environment like the land of the dead, the necromancer was not Sullen's opponent at all. After the shroud was completely broken, the necromancer's original body was revealed. Under Sullen's rapid and violent attacks, it was covered in wounds. Its originally skinny body was full of holes, and many of its bones were broken. If the land of the dead didn't constantly replenish its energy and speed up its recovery, this necromancer would have been killed by Su Len long ago. However, at this time, after Sullen's fierce attacks, this necromancer was at the end of its rope. War roar. A golden light burst forth from Sullen's body, and a powerful divine radiance erupted in an instant. The dazzling golden light swept over in an instant. At such a close distance, the necromancer had no time to dodge. Coupled with the fact that it had just been hit by the storm battle halberd, the necromancer's body suddenly stiffened at this moment. The sudden outburst of divine power directly interrupted the soulbound zombie demon's movements. Then, rune chains appeared in an instant, directly sealing the surrounding distance. At this moment, the soulbound zombie demon was like a little bug caught in a spider's web, trapped in place and unable to move. The soulbound zombie demon's own successful teleportation could not break the surrounding elemental shield at this moment. Space lock. Su Len, who had long been prepared, instantly erupted with a powerful force, sealing the surrounding space. The necromancer couldn't dodge at all. Thunder slash. Su Luan shouted, and the storm war halberd in his hand slashed towards the soul-binding zombie demon with boundless power. Accompanied by a dazzling burst of lightning, the soul-binding zombie demon in front of him was directly split in half from head to toe. Endless lightning burst out from the necromancer's body, and a large amount of death energy collapsed in an instant. Countless souls wailed, and the necromancer's body was completely destroyed in the lightning. Then, an extremely ugly soul appeared. It was the necromancer's soul. Although the necromancer had been killed by Su Len, as long as this soul escaped, it wouldn't be long before it seized a body and resurrected. Want to run? Go to hell. Lightning chains appeared in an instant, and then locked the necromancer's soul. The storm battle halberd flashed with lightning and directly split the necromancer's soul into two. After losing its body, the necromancer's soul was once again severely damaged, and this time, it could no longer maintain its soul form. A huge wound was torn open on the necromancer's soul, and then countless souls swarmed out of its wound. These souls had long been contaminated by the necromancer's power, and most of them had become incomplete. If they escaped from here, they would quickly be transformed into undead by the land of death. The entire space was enveloped by a lightning net, and all the souls were trapped here as soon as they appeared. Sullen's eyes flashed with a golden light, and then a divine radiance burst out from his body. Along with Sullen's roar, a divine radiance instantly swept in all directions with Sulen as the center. All the souls that came in contact with it let out a dying wail. Immediately afterward, a large number of gray soul crystals fell down like rain, and a series of clinking sounds could be heard. Soul-binding spell, magic gem. With a flash of light, the lightning chains dragged the soul of the soul-binding zombie demon and sealed it into a magic gem the size of a fist. Sulen reached out and put the black soul crystal into his bag. Although he only glanced at it briefly, Sulen already discovered that this soul crystal was also of the advanced legendary rank. Including this one, Sulen already had several soul crystals of this quality. Phew. After completely eliminating the necromancer, Sulen also let out a long sigh of relief. Through blood sacrifices, countless grudges and death energy entanglement, the soul-binding necromancer was finally born. The large number of souls in the soul-binding necromancer's body should have been the souls that were sacrificed. Even the natives had been devoured by the soul-binding necromancer. There were not many things left around. Sulen did not study much about religion, so he could only guess at the murals. After spending some time, Sulen finally walked around the entire palace and returned to the hall. This undead lord is so poor. Let alone a dragon, this harvest is even worse than a frost giant. As expected of the poor undead. Sulen shook his head in disappointment. He was not in a hurry to leave. He wanted to check on some of his gains. When he opened the storage space, other than the 4 treasure chests, there was also a black jade skeleton in the corner. This black jade skeleton was only the size of a palm and looked like the skull of a halfling. The whole skeleton was as delicate as black jade, and a strong death energy condensed on it. Sulen used appraisal on the black jade skeleton. With a flash of light, the attributes of the black jade skeleton appeared before his eyes. Black jade skeleton, strange item. This is a skeleton that has condensed a large amount of death energy. After use, it can transform a piece of land into a land of death. Or, if used in a land of death, it can accelerate the transformation of the land of death into an undead. Transform into an undead? A hint of excitement flashed in Sullen's eyes. This ability was actually not very useful to wizards. After all, necromancers were already notorious. It was useless for others to have it. However, it was good news for Sulen. After using the black jade skeleton, the speed at which undead creatures were born in a land of death would increase. A large number of undead creatures could provide a large number of soul crystals. Chapter 607. Sulen had originally planned to set up a camp here to collect soul crystals. At the same time, it was also a place for the Northern Garrison Army to gain EXP. With the Blackfish Skull, the number of undead in this area had greatly increased. To the Northern Garrison Army, not only could they obtain a large number of soul crystals, but they could also allow their army to grow rapidly. It was simply killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Next, Sulen took out the 4 treasure chests and chose to open them. After a burst of beautiful sound and light effects, Sulen heard the sound of a system notification. Congratulations, host. You have opened a diamond treasure chest. You have obtained 1 wishing crystal. Congratulations, host. You have opened a diamond treasure chest. You have obtained the forging blueprint for the divine weapon, Thunder God Spear. Congratulations, host. You have opened a diamond treasure chest. You have obtained the principle of anti-gravity. Congratulations, host. You have opened a platinum treasure chest. You have obtained the fountain of youth. Hearing the system notification, Sullen's face was filled with shock. He then impatiently took out the item. Sulen had obtained a wishing crystal in the past. Its function was very simple. It was to use the wishing spell to summon an elemental spirit to fulfill a wish. This wishing crystal was the reward for fulfilling the wish. There was still a lot of room for manipulation with the legendary wishing spell. The second treasure chest's item shocked Sulen. It was the forging blueprint for the divine weapon, Thunder God's Spear. One had to know that every item that was called a divine weapon possessed powerful strength. Even if it was not personally forged by a god, it was still unimaginably powerful. For example, there was once a mithril ring mail. Although he did not know who created this equipment, its defense was shockingly strong. It was enchanted with a legendary defensive spell. At the same time, it also had unimaginable elemental and physical resistance. Even a legendary weapon would find it difficult to break through its defense. More importantly, this mithril ring mail was as light as a feather. After wearing it, it would not affect the body's agility at all. Sulen picked up the blueprint and examined it. The blueprint of the Thunder God's Spear was recorded using an unknown animal skin. It recorded the entire forging process and the various materials needed. This forging blueprint could only be used once. After the forging was completed, it would self-destruct. Ever since Sulen's strength had surpassed the advanced legendary level and he had become an astral explorer, he had wanted to increase the power of his weapons. Now that he had this artifact forging blueprint, it was like meeting a pillow when he was sleepy. However, it was not easy to forge a divine artifact. The materials needed were very precious. Sulen had collected a lot of them in the past. The materials listed were 9 heaven black iron, dragon bone, god's blood, thunder crystal, and so on. Sulen already had some of the materials, and he planned to collect some of them. It would be great if he could buy them, but if he couldn't, he would have to think of other ways. The Principle of Anti-Gravity was a thick book. Although it seemed inconspicuous, it was important information for the construction of the floating space city. The area of the floating space city was much larger than that of the floating space tower. It required a lot of power to lift a city and then fly it into the sky. This was a very detailed and huge topic that involved a lot of things. Anti-gravity was a supplement to the floating space ring. Because the floating space city was too large and its weight was amazing, if such a city flew, the forces in the city would be uneven, and it was likely to cause the city to collapse and be damaged due to its own weight. Therefore, the power of the floating space ring must be evenly distributed to all parts of the floating space city. The same was true for the research of anti-gravity. Anti-gravity needed to offset most of the gravity of the floating space city, reduce the weight of the floating space city, and reduce the interaction forces within the floating space city. At the same time, the research of anti-gravity also involved gravity. After the floating space city entered the astral world, it needed to maintain gravity. The laws of the astral world were different from those of the material world. Ordinary people couldn't survive. The purpose of establishing an ecosphere was to allow ordinary people to live normally in the floating space city. Sulen and Hathaway now had a lot of information and knowledge about the floating space city. After the floating space tower was successfully built, it was almost time to start building the floating space city. Many of the technologies in the floating space tower could be applied to the floating space city, such as the elemental furnace technology. After the elemental furnace technology was upgraded to elemental fusion, it could replace the mice energy core as the energy source of the floating space city. Sulen still had no clue about the mice energy core technology. At that time, the technology was only in the hands of the great arcanists in the Arcane Kingdom, and no one else knew about it. Since the destruction of the Arcane Kingdom, countless people wanted to rebuild the floating space city, but the mice energy core had not been produced. Some wizards suspected that the mice energy core needed the power of the goddess of magic to be produced. However, the wizards did not give up on the research of the floating space city. After they could no longer produce the mice energy core, the wizards began to turn their attention to another top research in the era of the Arcane Kingdom, the elemental furnace. In the later years of the Arcane Kingdom, the elemental furnace had completed elemental fusion and entered the stage of elemental annihilation. The floating space city, which relied on the elemental fusion furnace to operate, was created. But in the final glory of the Arcane Kingdom, the elemental fusion furnace was destroyed along with the Arcane Kingdom. In that battle, the Arcane Kingdom was defeated and destroyed, and a lot of information disappeared. For the gods, the information of the Arcane Kingdom's research must be destroyed. Although the Arcane Kingdom was destroyed, in that war, the gods also suffered heavy losses, and some of them even fell. The gods were very vigilant against the civilization that could threaten them, and they wished to destroy all the information. The current wizard civilization had not yet produced the elemental fission furnace. Sulen had basically collected all kinds of information about the floating space city. Some of the information did not meet the requirements and needed to be upgraded for research. The items from the 3 diamond treasure chests were very good, and the last platinum treasure chest also made Sulen happy. It was a liter of the Fountain of Youth. The Fountain of Youth was a kind of wonder in nature. It was called the Fountain of Youth, but in fact, this kind of spring water could not really make one immortal. The Fountain of Youth was a low-level version of the Fountain of Life. The Fountain of Life could increase one's lifespan by 1,000 years. Naturally, it was very precious. The Fountain of Youth could only increase one's lifespan by about 150 years. However, although the Fountain of Life was precious and could be called a treasure of heaven and earth, it had not appeared for 1 or 2,000 years. However, there was still some news about the Fountain of Youth. Fountain of Youth, wonder. The Fountain of Youth is the essence of nature. It is a gift from nature. It has magical effects and can give people a long lifespan. Countless people will do anything to get it. There are very few places in the entire material plane where the Fountain of Youth can be found. Effect: restore life, regrow broken limbs, heal fatal injuries, stay young forever, extend lifespan. Effect 1: restore life. 1 milliliter of the Fountain of Youth can restore 10 points of life force. This effect is only effective on living creatures. Effect 2: regrow broken limbs. The Fountain of Youth can regrow broken limbs, but the amount needed to be taken according to the severity of the injury. Regrow broken limbs requires 300 milliliters. Effect 3: heal fatal injuries. The Fountain of Youth can heal fatal injuries, but the amount needed to be taken is also sufficient. Drinking 1 liter of the Fountain of Youth before death can heal all injuries on the body. Effect 4: stay young forever. The Fountain of Youth can keep the appearance of all living creatures. Only in the last 10 years of the living creature's life will the creature show signs of aging. Effect 5: extend lifespan. After drinking the Fountain of Youth, one's lifespan can be increased by about 150 years. This effect is effective on all living creatures. Note, this effect must be triggered when the user is full of life force. To be honest, the effect of the Fountain of Youth on Sulen was very limited. After becoming a demigod, Sulen would live for at least a few thousand years, or even longer. So far, Sulen had never heard of a demigod who died of old age. Even in some remote primitive planes, many demigods had lived for tens of thousands of years. Therefore, the most important effect of the Fountain of Youth was basically useless to him. As for regrowing broken limbs, recovering life force, and even healing fatal injuries, these were also not attractive to Sulen. After all, he had the physical healing skill. The physical healing skill could heal serious injuries. As long as the person was not dead, it could be revived. It just needed to be cast a few times. As for the more powerful reversal skill, Sulen had not learned it yet. The reversal skill could even revive a person who had just died. Although the Fountain of Youth was not attractive to him, it was very attractive to others. The lifespan of a human in this world was about 70 years. Of course, this was referring to the nobles. The lifespan of an ordinary person was about 50 years. This was because the elemental energy in the world of Terrala was abundant, and ordinary people had good physical fitness. The lifespan of a professional was much longer. As long as they did not suffer any serious injuries when they were young, it was normal for them to live to 70 or 80 years old. Of course, after becoming a legend, one's lifespan would be even longer. The Fountain of Youth was very attractive to both warriors and nobles. Even a legendary warrior could only live to about 200 years old. Moreover, after 130 years old, their condition would gradually decline. After 160 years old, their strength would degrade to that of a conferred knight. However, if they consumed the Fountain of Youth, they could easily live to 350 years old. This was almost twice the lifespan of a legendary warrior. Moreover, due to the effect of eternal youth, they could reach a shocking 340 years old at their peak. Other than humans, the Fountain of Youth was also very attractive to other races. The lifespan of a dwarf was about 400 to 500 years old, and a half-elf was about 300 years old. Although their lifespan was longer than that of humans, no one would complain about having a longer lifespan. Chapter 608. Sulan had obtained a liter of the Fountain of Youth. He was planning to give half of it to the soldiers of the North Town City. Most of the soldiers were humans, and their lifespans were limited. Sulan had no use for the Fountain of Youth, but it was a good idea to give it to his men. Since there was only a limited amount of the Fountain of Youth, he could only give it to the soldiers who had contributed the most. It was very beneficial to the North Town City. Not only would it make them work harder, the soldiers would also benefit from it. They would support Sulan even more. Most importantly, even if one thought that the Fountain of Youth would grant them a lifespan of 150 years, what would happen in reality? The peak life of a soldier below the legendary rank was 45 years old. Their lifespan would start to decline after that. The peak life of a soldier below the legendary rank was 120 years old. However, after consuming the Fountain of Youth, the peak life of a soldier below the legendary rank was over 200 years old. Those above the legendary rank could live up to 300 years old. It was a great deal. Overall, the soldiers were working hard to exchange for the Fountain of Youth to extend their lifespan. They could continue to contribute to the work of the North Town City. Even though the soul-binding zombie monster had been killed, the problem it had left behind was still unsolved. He had to deal with the Land of Death. Sulan had already decided to turn the place into a training ground for new players. It would also become a soul crystal resource point. However, Sulan had to seal off the Land of Death and place the black jade skeletons here to prevent others from coming in and destroying the place. It was easy to deal with. He just had to bury the black jade skeletons in the Land of Death, and they would merge on their own. Sulan then added another layer of seal to the Land of Death. The seal only allowed people to leave, but not enter. Sulan left after seeing the undead being born in the Land of Death again. Outside the Valley of Death, the soldiers of the North Town City were still guarding the altar. A teleportation light flashed, and Sulan appeared. "Your Majesty, you're back," a servant said respectfully. "It's done. Let's leave," Sulan said. The team soon swept through the army and arrived at the entrance of the Valley of Death. Sulan had already decided to turn the place into a training ground and a soul crystal resource point. It was necessary to modify the place. Thunder Domain. Sulan stood at the entrance of the Death Canyon. Dazzling lightning instantly enveloped his body, and the entire sky darkened at this moment. Countless lightning bolts rolled in the sky, as if they were about to fall in the next second. The powerful energy directly lifted Sulan's body in midair. Countless lightning snakes swam in midair, and the entire world seemed to be about to be destroyed at this moment. A golden light appeared on Sulan's body. Then, Sulan's entire body was wrapped in a layer of golden light. At this moment, a golden shadow rose from his body, surrounded by countless lightning bolts. The surrounding soldiers had already retreated far away. Sulan directly exploded with nearly 80% of his strength at this moment. Mana control. Mud to stone. Dazzling magic energy emerged from Sulan's body. Then, an 800-meter-long stone wall suddenly rose at the entrance of the Death Canyon. Under the influence of this powerful magic, the stone wall quickly rose. It soon rose to 50 meters before stopping. In an instant, the entrance of the Death Canyon was blocked by the stone wall. Then, Sulan gently waved his hand. A golden light appeared, and then the golden light flashed and disappeared into the stone wall. The original stone wall became even stronger. After completing all this, Sulan slowly breathed a sigh of relief. The oppressive power on his body also slowly dissipated. Soon, the lightning dissipated, and Sulan returned to his previous appearance. The only change was that the entrance of the Death Canyon was blocked by a 50-meter-tall stone wall. After sealing the Death Canyon, Sulen led the soldiers back to the northern battlefront city. The rest of the matters were left to the others. The Death Canyon would become the new resource point of the northern battlefront city. After returning to the northern battlefront city, Sulen rested for a day. The next morning, he went to the wizard tower to find Hathaway. This time, he had obtained the divine weapon forging blueprint. He planned to forge it. This is the divine weapon forging blueprint? Hathaway looked at the blueprint in her hand curiously. There's a rule power on it. How about it? I plan to upgrade the storm battle halberd into the thunder god spear. I need your help. Sulen took out the storm battle halberd and said, How do you want me to help you? Hathaway returned the blueprint to Sulen and said, It's very difficult to forge a divine weapon. Let's not talk about the materials, but the forging process is very advanced. It's very difficult for a mortal to forge a divine weapon, and they also need the help of a powerful wizard. Sulen shrugged and said, We can find a few master blacksmiths here. Those gray dwarves have them. You can give it a try with enchantment. Alright, but forging a divine weapon is the most basic. You still need to inject divinity into the weapon. Have you prepared the divinity? Hathaway asked. I'm ready. Sulen flipped his hand and took out a divinity crystal. It was left behind by the soul-binding necromancer he killed. There are 4 divinity points in here. I'll extract some from the god's corpse. That's 5 divinity points. It should be enough. Since everything is ready, let's get started, Hathaway said. The Grey Dwarves lived a very comfortable life in Northern Town City. They went to the blacksmith's workshop every day to forge weapons, and when they came back at night, they could have a drink at the tavern. They also received a salary every day. Unlike before, when all their wealth belonged to the king, the Grey Dwarves were very satisfied with their lives. Of course, it would be even better if there was more alcohol. Sulen set a daily workload for these Grey Dwarves. Only those who completed their work would be given alcohol, and those who did a good job would be rewarded. Of course, to not affect their work, there was a limit to the amount of alcohol they could get every day. Northern Town City adhered to the idea that labor would be rewarded. The more work, the more rewards. When they heard that the city lord wanted to forge a powerful weapon, and that he needed the Grey Dwarves with the best forging skills, the Grey Dwarves were very enthusiastic. Soon, the Grey Dwarves with the best forging skills appeared in front of Sulen. Nice to meet you. Sulen smiled at the 3 Grey Dwarves in front of him. I'm sure you already know that I'm here to forge a powerful weapon for you. Your Majesty, what weapon would you like to forge? Please don't hesitate to ask. Old Han's craftsmanship isn't just for show, it's definitely the best amongst us Grey Dwarves. A Grey Dwarf who was only about 1.4 meters tall, but was extremely sturdy said as he patted his chest. Your Majesty, don't listen to him. Let me forge the weapon. I think I can give you a surprise. Another Grey Dwarf said eagerly. Your Majesty, my forging skills are the best. Let me forge it. The 3 Grey Dwarves fought for the right to forge the weapon. The Grey Dwarves were all very loud. When they argued, it was like they were in a blacksmith's workshop. They kept on arguing. Quiet, the noise made Sulen's head hurt. Sulen immediately stopped them from arguing. The weapon I'm going to forge this time requires a very high level of forging skills. It must be perfect. Sulen said coldly. He then took out a scroll and said, This is the blueprint. You can take a look at it first. With that, Sulen handed the blueprint to them. The 3 Grey Dwarves took the blueprint and opened it. They were immediately engrossed in studying it. Heavens, this is unbelievable. This is a divine weapon? I'm not dreaming, am I? Is this the design of a divine weapon? The 3 Durgars exclaimed. Are you done? Sulen put down his teacup and reached out to take the blueprint. Yes, Your Majesty. The 3 Grey Dwarves said with a nod. Since you're done, are you confident? The three gray dwarves looked at each other. In the end, Old Han hesitated and said, "Your Majesty, we're only 60% confident in forging this divine weapon. We can't do anything about the enchantment of this divine weapon. You don't have to worry about that. Someone will take care of it. Your mission is to forge this weapon," Sulen said directly. "That's good, Your Majesty. This time, the three of us plan to work together. We'll definitely forge a divine weapon that you'll be satisfied with," Old Han said. "Very good. If this divine weapon is successfully forged, your names will be known throughout the continent. You should know that this divine weapon was forged by the hands of mortals. Thank you, Your Majesty, for giving us this opportunity." The three gray dwarves stood up and said, "But Your Majesty, we need to prepare before forging the divine weapon. Please give us some time." "All right, then you may go and prepare." Sulen nodded to show that he understood. "Then, Your Majesty, we'll take our leave first." The gray dwarves left the capital with serious expressions. They then went to the blacksmith's workshop and began their preparations. After making all these arrangements, Sulen also began to get busy. Forging a divine weapon required a lot of materials. Sulen had already collected most of them, but there was still one main material that he had not found yet. Thunder crystal. This was a special kind of crystal that contained extremely pure thunder energy. It was very rare in the material plane. Suren had already asked the wizard organizations he was working with to see if they had any thunder crystal. Unfortunately, none of them had anything like this. After hesitating for a while, Sulen took out a wishing crystal. He planned to use the power of the giant elemental spirit to obtain the thunder crystal. Legend had it that the legendary wishing spell could grant any wish. However, this was only a legend. In fact, the legendary wishing spell had a lot of limitations and many traps. When describing a wish, one must be careful to prevent one's request from being maliciously misinterpreted. In theory, any wish could be granted, but it was up to others to make it come true. Chapter 609. After making up his mind, Sulen quickly set up a wishing table and the astrology platform and prepared to cast the wishing spell. After the preparation of the wishing table was completed, Sulen slowly closed his eyes and began to organize his words. This was the most troublesome part of the wishing spell. When making a wish, you had to negotiate with the jinn of elements. These jinn of elements would distort your meaning in various ways. They would find any loopholes and use them to their advantage. You had to block all the loopholes. The process of using the wishing spell was no less than negotiating with a senior demon. The contract had to be very careful. If one was not smart enough, it was very likely that they would be played by the word games in the contract. In the end, they would pay a huge price and not get the result they wanted. This was not a joke. Wizards had paid a huge price and finally summed up a set of effective wishing rules. Sulen took a deep breath, then suddenly opened his eyes. His body flashed, and he instantly activated the rune array. The wishing table operated, and the surrounding magic crystals suddenly appeared with a strange light. Then a low spell sounded, and powerful elemental energy surged out in an instant. A wave of elements that made people's hearts palpitate came out. The powerful elemental energy directly distorted the surrounding space. With the gathering of magic energy, a powerful victory shrouded directly. An elemental god? Sulen felt the powerful divine power. Then a gust of wind blew, and countless wind elements gathered into a shadow in the air. It was a wind elemental god. As soon as the wind elemental god appeared, he looked at Sulen and gently waved his hand. Then a contract scroll and a feather pen appeared in his hand. A majestic voice sounded in the wizard tower. "Did you summon me? A demigod? Do you have any wishes that you want to fulfill?" Sulen was surprised that he could summon a wind elemental god this time. He thought it would be good enough to summon an elemental god this time. He did not expect that an elemental god would answer his call in person. Of course, compared to an elemental god, elemental gods could fulfill more wishes, which was also good news. It was said that if a god used the wishing spell, he would summon the oldest 4 elemental gods. Demigod, state your wish. The wind elemental god urged. Greetings, respected wind elemental god, I want a thunder crystal. Sulen expressed his wish. The wind elemental god nodded. Yes, but you need to pay a certain price. In addition, you need to write your wish on this contract scroll. Only when you sign the contract will I grant your wish. Sulen took the contract and wrote down his wishes. This was a very important step. This kind of contract had to be strict. In fact, it was very suitable to let a lawyer write it. They would rack their brains to block all the loopholes. After spending some time, Sulen finally finished writing all the words. After making sure that there were no loopholes, he handed the contract scroll to the god of wind elemental. 1 thunder divinity crystal obtained. The wind elemental god nodded slightly. The thunder divinity crystal is very rare and valuable. Are you ready to pay the price? After seeing Sulen nod, the wind elemental god picked up a goose feather pen and quickly wrote the transaction content on the contract. After writing, the wind elemental god handed the contract scroll to Sulen again for inspection. He wanted to make sure that the contract was correct. 1 thunder divinity crystal. You need to pay some divinity or a part of your soul power. If you agree, leave your soul mark on it. Sulen took the contract scroll and read it carefully. He had to be careful. Next, Sulen and the wind elemental god modified a few details on the contract. After making sure that there were no problems, he left his soul mark on it. I want to use this crystal as a payment. Sulen took out the wishing crystal that he had prepared earlier. Wishing crystal? I haven't seen such a thing for a long time. Young demigod, you are lucky. The wind elemental god was a little surprised. Then, he directly agreed to Sulen's payment. Since both sides have agreed, let's start the transaction. The wind elemental god waved his hand gently. The contract scroll instantly turned into specks of light and dissipated. Then, a surge of divine power appeared. In the next second, a thunder divinity crystal appeared in front of Sulen. The thunder divinity crystal was a blue crystal the size of a fist. The crystal was translucent. Countless lightning powers were entangled in the crystal. Every now and then, a golden light flashed on the surface of the crystal. Then, the wishing crystal in Sulen's hand instantly flew into the wind elemental god's hand. In the next second, it disappeared. The contract is complete. Little guy, I hope you still have a wishing crystal when we meet next time. As he spoke, the wind elemental god glanced at Sulen. Then, he turned into a gust of wind and disappeared without a trace. The divine power that shrouded the wizard tower also disappeared. Sulen picked up the thunder divinity crystal with one hand and played with it. He held his chin with the other hand and thought to himself, it seems that the wishing crystal is very attractive to them. Sulen could only get the wishing crystal from a treasure chest. He didn't know where this crystal could be produced. It was probably impossible to find a large number of wishing crystals to trade with the elemental god. Sulen quickly put this matter aside. The next important thing was to forge a divine weapon. After a few days of preparation, the 3 dwarven blacksmiths had finished all the preparations. Sulen took Hathaway to the blacksmith's shop. As soon as they got close, a rhythmic sound of hammering came. Clang, clang, clang. The crisp sound of fine iron striking rang out. Hundreds of shirtless dwarves were sweating in the blacksmith's shop. Waves of heat were rolling, and orange flames rose. On both sides of the hall, dwarves were waving their arms hard to forge iron ingots. Heavy hammers smashed hard on the red-hot iron, and countless sparks flew out. Grey dwarves wearing thick leather aprons were hitting all kinds of sword embryos on the iron felt attentively. The flames swayed, and the dwarves' chests were reflected red by the furnace fire. A lot of sweat slid down their bodies, and their whole bodies seemed to be smeared with a layer of oil. Small pits were burned on their firm faces by the sparks, but these dwarves didn't care at all. In the blazing furnace, a red sword embryo was burning in the flames. The grey dwarf next to him picked it out with a serious face. The sword embryo was red, and as soon as it was taken out, the dwarf put the sword embryo directly into the liquid next to it. As soon as the fiery red sword embryo was put in, a burst of flames jumped up, followed by a burst of crackling sounds. White smoke rolled, and the liquid instantly boiled. When the sword embryo was taken out again, a layer of fish scale-like patterns appeared on the surface of the sword embryo. It looked very beautiful. Sulen knew that this pattern would only appear on a high-quality weapon after countless rounds of forging. In the hall, pieces of iron embryos were constantly hammered into the shapes of various weapons and armors. Then, they were sent into the cooling pool next to the furnace with iron pliers. The water in the cooling pool was not ordinary water. This was one of the dwarves' secret recipes. It was a quenching liquid made from more than a dozen different materials. These quenching liquids were divided into several types. They were specially used to quench various kinds of weapons. When the smoke dissipated, the dwarves began to repeat the previous forging process again. Their movements were strong and powerful. Although it looked very simple, it was full of a strange rhythm. Under their careful forging, high-quality weapons were forged under the hammers. This was the blacksmith workshop in northern Battlefront City. High-quality weapons were forged every day. Now, the army of northern Battlefront City had basically finished changing their equipment. The arrival of Sulen and Hathaway didn't attract their attention. The dwarves were still very serious when they were working. Soon, a blacksmith steward brought Sulen and Hathaway to a room next door. At this time, 3 dwarven blacksmith masters were also forging with bare arms. "Looks like you're well prepared." Sulen glanced at what the 3 dwarves were forging. It was a weapon very similar to the Thunder God spear, but the material used was ordinary fine iron. It was completely different from the Thunder God spear. The 3 dwarves were building this model to familiarize themselves with the forging method of the Thunder God spear. "Your Majesty, you're here. We're ready." Hans stopped immediately when he heard Sulen's voice. "All the materials for the Thunder God's spear are ready. Now, I'll give it to you to forge." Sulen nodded at them and took out the materials that had been prepared. Seeing the rare materials appear in front of them, the dwarves were a little excited. "Everything is here. This is the forging blueprint of the Thunder God's spear. Hathaway and I will be here to help you," Sulen said after handing the things to the 3 dwarves. "As you wish. We will do our best to forge this artifact," Hans said with a serious face. Then, the 3 dwarves began to work. In the past few days, the 3 dwarven blacksmith masters had practiced several times. Now, it could be said that they were familiar with the process. They picked up the materials and began to forge. Sulen and Hathaway didn't disturb the 3 dwarves. They stood aside and watched them quietly. The 9th heaven black iron was calcined in a special furnace. The flames in the furnace became very bright, and the temperature reached thousands of degrees. However, the 9th heaven black iron was very difficult to forge. Even at thousands of degrees, it still took a lot of time to smelt it. "Heat the furnace with magic," the grey dwarf said directly. Sulen waved his hand gently. Immediately, a strong fire element appeared in the furnace, and the temperature of the furnace increased again. Chapter 6:10. Flames rose, and waves of heat rose from the furnace. All kinds of metal materials quickly heated up, softened, and finally melted. Immediately after, several grey dwarves continuously threw in all kinds of materials. Sullen's storm war halberd was also smelted again, and the low-grade materials were separated out, and then continuously mixed. Scalding molten iron gushed out, and a fiery red torrent surged wantonly. Soon, the embryonic form of a long spear appeared in the mold. The heavy hammer smashed the grinding tool, and the grey dwarf with a solemn expression carefully took out the spear embryo. Then, the spear embryo was once again sent into the furnace to be burned and forged. Old Han used a pair of pliers to clamp the spear embryo in front of him, and then fixed the spear embryo on the iron felt. Another gray dwarf at the side picked up the hammer and took a deep breath. Clang! A crisp sound rang out as the hammer heavily smashed onto the spear embryo. With the help of the reaction force, Old Han once again smashed the hammer down fiercely. Sparks flew everywhere, and the fiery red furnace illuminated the blacksmith's shirtless body. It was as if his body was wrapped in a layer of crimson clothing, and he looked just like the legendary god of forging. A streak of light slowly flowed on the spear embryo. Hathaway stretched out her finger and lightly tapped it. A ray of light quickly spread from her hand, and then the arcane powder beside her directly flew up, instantly turning into countless streaks of light that quickly flew towards the spear embryo. The streaks of light formed by the arcane powder flickered with a colorful brilliance. As the hammer hammered, they continuously merged into the spear embryo, and the originally gray spear embryo began to flicker with specks of light. Under the influence of a strange power, these streams of light flowed like water and quickly formed mysterious runes. These runes were linked with each other and constantly blended together. Finally, they formed a beautiful pattern on the handle of the spear. As the spear embryo gradually took shape, Su Len took out the divine crystal that he had prepared long ago. A strange energy spread out from his body, and in the next second, Su Len was enveloped in a faint golden light. Su Len opened his eyes, and the whole room seemed to flash with a golden light. Divine power completely erupted at this moment. In the light of divinity, Sullen's originally human emotions quickly disappeared, and his absolutely rational and cold thoughts began to take control of his body. All the emotions and desires that represented a human were all blocked. From this moment on, Su Len had become a constructed life form like the tower spirit. In this case, Su Luan's various calculation abilities reached the highest level. In his eyes, there was no good or evil, no personal preferences, only gains and losses. Coldness and rationality, which represented his divinity, were completely revealed at this moment. At this moment, Sullen's eyes were cold and merciless as he looked at everyone. He was absolutely rational, like a god, as if he was indifferent to everything else. Streaks of light quickly appeared around him, and the power of thunder and lightning turned into chains. Golden divine power slowly emerged from Su Luan's body, and lines of golden runes emerged. Sullen's palm exerted force, and a golden light instantly merged with the divine crystal. In the next second, the divine crystal burst into a dazzling golden light, and then this golden light slowly flew out of the quiet room under Sullen's command. At the same time, another divine crystal of thunder also flew up. The golden light linked with the divine crystal of thunder, and the divine crystal of thunder quickly turned into a ball of purple energy. Then, a huge amount of divine power was released at this moment. The divine power and the divine power of thunder intertwined, and golden light constantly flashed in the purple gold energy. In the end, under Sullen's manipulation, the golden light slowly flew to the spear embryo, and finally merged with it. The originally gray spear also turned purple gold. The three dwarven blacksmiths took turns forging, and a very rhythmic sound of forging rang out continuously. Sparks burst out, and the divine weapon slowly appeared in the flames. The whole process lasted for 3 days, and when the last hammer fell, all the sound seemed to disappear at this moment. Su Len took out the divine weapon forging blueprint, and the blueprint slowly flew up, and soon floated above the thunder god spear. Then, the blueprint quickly burned, and a strange power slowly fell and merged with it. In an instant, the thunder god spear, which seemed to be covered with a layer of shadow, suddenly burst into a dazzling golden light. Golden lightning surrounded the surface of the thunder god spear, and at this moment, Su Len immediately burst out all the lightning power in his body, and then merged it with the spear. A dazzling divine light appeared, and with the complete integration of the divine power, the divine weapon forging blueprint also merged with the strange power of law. The thunder god spear was finally completed. Item type: Thunder God Spear. Item grade: Tier 2 Divine Weapon. Item description: this was once a weapon that had its fill of blood. This weapon had followed its owner into battle and killed countless enemies. One after another, experts had fallen under its sharp blade. This weapon was stained with the blood of legendary experts, demons, and abominations. Later, its owner once again injected divinity and the divine power of thunder into this weapon. This weapon had undergone a complete transformation. Requirements: Order, Strength 20 points. Owner: Sulen, Soulbound. Equipment effect: Divine Weapon, Thunder God's Blessing, plus 12 penetration, plus 13 armor break, plus 20 true damage, plus 12 sharpness, plus 55 indestructible, plus 13 magic break. Weapon special effect: Blessings of the Thunder God. Wielding this weapon grants the user the blessings of the Thunder God. Resistance to all abnormal statuses plus 20. Immunity to paralysis, drowsiness, lightning, and other magic effects. Also, the user gains an electrostatic field. The electrostatic field deals 15 lightning damage to all enemies within a 50-meter radius. The target must pass an immunity test every minute. Otherwise, the target will be paralyzed. Weapon special effect: Indestructible. This is a powerful legendary weapon. It can't be destroyed by conventional means, and it is also immune to disintegrate. Only legendary disintegrate has a 0.1% chance of destroying this weapon, but the destroyer will also receive a backlash from the weapon. Weapon special effect: Power of Lightning. Each attack will deal an additional 80 points of lightning damage. The damage can be stacked. When the damage is dealt, the target will be paralyzed. Any target whose constitution is unable to resist will be paralyzed for 1 to 3 seconds. When using lightning energy, the damage of lightning energy will be increased by 100%, and the consumption will be reduced by 80%. Weapon special effect: Slow. After being quenched by the blood of Cryopterus, Ice Quetzalcoatlus, and the blood of legendary water demons, each attack of this weapon will add 15 ice damage and reduce the speed of the target by 20%. Constitution test is required. Weapon special effect: Life absorption. Every time after killing an enemy, this weapon will absorb a part of the power. The absorbed power can be used to heal the user's injuries. After killing the enemy, the user will recover 20 HP, protection. After the user's physical strength reaches the maximum value, the power absorbed by the weapon will automatically be stored and form an energy shield. When the user is injured, it can directly help the user to resist the damage. Weapon special effect: Magic break. As a divine weapon, this Thunder God Spear has a terrible magic breaking ability. It can easily break part of the magic defense. When attacking, it can ignore all defensive spells and energy fields below the 6th circle. At the same time, the effect of defensive spells above the 6th circle is reduced by 35%. Weapon special effect: Armor break. As a divine spear, the Thunder God Spear has an extremely terrifying armor breaking ability. It can easily break through the protection of most armors. In the case of hitting the enemy, the Thunder God Spear directly ignores all armors below the legendary level. Weapon special effect: Legendary blood. This weapon has killed a lot of strong people. It is soaked in the blood of legendary masters, high-level demons, abominations, and other monsters. This weapon will cause a shock to enemies below the high-level legendary level. All enemies must undergo a test of will. If they fail, their body will be stiff for 1 second. This weapon will cause a shock to legendary enemies, but there is also a chance that it will completely anger the enemy. The golden light on Sullen's body slowly dissipated, and the power of thunder that had shrouded the whole blacksmith shop also disappeared. Hathaway also withdrew her power, and the whole blacksmith shop returned to calm at this moment. A divine weapon was finally forged under the joint efforts of the 5 people. Sulen invested a lot of resources and consumed a lot of resources. At the same time, the integration of 5 points of divinity made this weapon directly reach the level of a 2nd-grade divine weapon. Even a true god would feel the pinch of such a cost, but the divine weapon in the end was unexpectedly powerful. After Hadang and the other 2 completed the forging of the divine weapon, their originally tense spirits suddenly relaxed, and their originally rock-like faces seemed to have aged a little at this moment. Your Majesty, thank you for your trust in us, allowing us to participate in the forging of such a divine artifact in our lifetime. To be able to complete such a magnificent work of art in our lifetime, we can die without regrets. Old Hadding exclaimed in elation. Thank you for your dedication to forge such a powerful weapon for me. I will ask someone to send you a bottle of Fountain of Youth as a reward. Now you are too tired, and you need to rest as soon as possible to recover, Su Len said seriously. After hearing about the Fountain of Youth, the eyes of the dwarves instantly lit up, and they said excitedly, "Thank you for your generosity. Okay, you guys go back and rest first." Su Len and Hathaway returned to the Tower of the Northern Wind together. The two of them were a little tired after 3 days of casting spells. Originally, their work was not very difficult, but because they were worried that something would go wrong, the two of them were nervous all the time. Su Len only collected a set of materials to forge the divine weapon in total. If there was a mistake that caused the power of the divine weapon to decrease and there were no spare materials, he would have nowhere to cry. Fortunately, Su Len and Hathaway did not have any problems, and finally successfully completed the enchantment process of the Thunder God Spear. Chapter 6:11. The Thunder God Spear was a level 2 divine artifact, which was quite good among the divine artifacts. The abilities of this divine artifact were also very good. For example, true damage was very rare even among the divine artifacts. True damage was different from other types of damage. The damage caused by it could not be avoided, so 20 points would be 20 points. Although the lightning damage was as high as 80 points, it needed to be reduced by the original magic resistance and other resistances to cause damage. It was very effective against weak cannon fodder, but its effect was very limited against powerful enemies. Just like the abomination, this creature's body was surrounded by a divine force field. It had high resistance and all kinds of damage immunity. The lightning damage carried by the Thunder God Spear could only cause single-digit damage to it. It was not even as strong as its recovery ability. Of course, if this ability was combined with another weapon's special effect, Life Drain, it would be very powerful. Life Drain was a very rare ability. After killing the enemy, it would draw the power of the enemy to recover. Individually, killing one person would only recover 20 points of HP. However, combined with the area of effect damage of the Thunder God's Blessing, one enemy would be 20 points, and 10 enemies would be 200 points. In a group battle, Sullen's HP recovery speed would be very exaggerated. If there were enough enemies, Sullen's recovery speed could not even keep up with the abominations. If they wanted to defeat him, they could only rely on one-on-one combat. With Sullen's current strength, he had never lost a one-on-one combat. With his current physical fitness, unless he was in the form of a god saint, he would not care about anything else at all. Finally, he had a divine artifact. Su Len was so excited that he almost ran out to show off. Fortunately, he forced himself to be rational. He should not show off his wealth. Moreover, this divine artifact was his trump card. He wouldn't reveal it so easily. The number of divine artifacts in this world was very small. Other than the gods, there were probably only 1 or 2 divine artifacts in the world. Divine artifacts needed to be infused with divine power and divine power. Even the gods might not be willing to do so. Divinity was also very important to the gods. In addition to divinity and divine power, a divine artifact also needed the power of law. This was one of the reasons why divine artifacts were so powerful. Not everyone could use divine artifacts. Even extraordinary items had profession and physical fitness requirements, not to mention powerful items like divine artifacts. The power of law that Su Len infused into this divine artifact was a part of the Law of Thunder. This law was contained in the original divine artifact forging blueprint. This divine artifact could only be used to forge one divine artifact. Divine artifact. Even if Su Len collected another set of materials, without the power of law, this divine artifact's divine artifact. During the forging process, Su Len had integrated a trace of his soul force into the Thunder God Spear. This way, the Thunder God Spear would become Su Len's personal divine artifact. Even if the Thunder God Spear fell into someone else's hands, that person wouldn't be able to display its power and would even be attacked by the divine artifact. For example, there was once a divine artifact called the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings was very powerful. For some reason, this divine artifact fell into the material plane and was obtained by many people. However, the people who obtained the Lord of the Rings did not gain great power. Instead, most people were bewitched by the Lord of the Rings. They even became puppets and slaves of the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings would even control these slaves to go to the location of its real master. Sulen. If others wanted to use this divine artifact, they had to obtain his approval. Only then could they use it in a limited way. Of course, Sulen could also make some modifications. As long as one had his blood, they could also use this divine artifact. Of course, this right to use it was temporary. As long as Sulen was willing, he could take it away at any time. Many powerful gods had left such divine artifacts, such as the King of Dawn, the God of Justice, and the God of Light. For example, the strongest divine artifacts of the Paladins, the Pale Justice and the Holy Avenger, both of these divine artifacts required the user to be aligned with the lawful good, and the user had to be a paladin. Therefore, these two divine artifacts were also called holy swords. The paladins were a group of very troublesome existences. This was because the paladins seriously could not tolerate evil. However, this world had never been bright and righteous. It could be said that almost all cities were hiding evil. Even Sulen's northern city was no exception. There were a large number of slaves and serfs in the northern city. According to the standards of the paladins, these were also evil. However, this world could not be without paladins. They were the bottom line of this world and the hope of all the good people. As people who adhered to the lawful good, they had very strong will and beliefs. If wizards were 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000, then paladins were 1 in 100,000. It was difficult to become a paladin not because one was not talented enough, but because one had to firmly believe in justice and kindness. If one could not uphold justice and kindness, then a paladin would quickly fall. Once a paladin fell, then the power they possessed would disappear, and they would eventually become an ordinary warrior. Of course, it was also possible that their beliefs would collapse and they would completely fall into darkness, becoming a dark warrior. Paladins pursued justice and kindness. Their beliefs were to protect kindness, pursue justice, and destroy evil. However, very few people could do it. Even the most ordinary civilians, if you used alignment testing spells, you would find that many of them leaned towards evil. Even in the 21st century, when technology was advanced, society was prosperous, and the legal system was improving day by day, there were all kinds of criminals, gray areas, collusion between officials and businessmen, and crimes committed by officials. Not to mention the Middle Ages. In this era where productivity was lagging behind and the power of the nobles was almost at its peak, who would expect the nobles to uphold justice? They only knew how to protect their own status and interests, not so-called justice. In any city in this world, if the paladins were to clean it up, a large number of people would be executed in the end. Corrupt officials, nobles who had no regard for human life, merchants who cheated and sold shoddy food, harmful food, expensive drugs, black-hearted minds, and so on would all be executed. How many of those nobles, officials, and merchants could be counted on to be clean? Just like the merchants who came to the northern city to trade, they were all well-behaved in the city like good people, but if they encountered them in the wild, they would be very skilled in killing and robbing. One could tell at a glance that these people were veterans. As for those kind merchants, they only had two choices in this environment: either they would wallow in the mire and become the same kind of people, or they would give up this path. According to Capital, when Capital came to the world again, blood and filth would drip from every pore from head to toe. So, according to the standards of the paladins, the whole city was basically ruined. But if the paladins were asked to ignore this, then the paladins were asking them to give up their insistence, and they would no longer be paladins. Although Sulen did not like the paladins, he respected them. If he was still the hot-blooded young man of the past, maybe Sulen would also become a paladin, but after experiencing so many things, he had long understood it, but he was powerless to change it. After completing the divine weapon Thor's lance, Sulen began other work. Deepwater City needed to continue to open up new channels, in addition to the trade route to the eastern continent, and also the channel to the Southern Sea. If Deepwater City wanted to develop, it must have as many ships as possible docked here to trade. At the same time, the Navy of Deepwater City began to guard the channel and fight against pirates after completing the primary training. The number of islands in the Southern Sea could be said to be the largest in the world. After all, this sea area was the busiest. Chapter 6:12. While Sulen was busy opening up a new waterway, the development of Northern Citadel did not stop. Several towns and cities were built along the route from Northern Citadel to Deepwater Port. These towns and cities were small in size and only had a population of about 1,000 people. All of them were located along the Red Sand River. These towns and cities were originally built as supply stations for ships that came and went. The council halls saw that these settlements were developing well, so they directly assigned the immigrants who came in the past few months to these settlements along the river. Since the construction of Deepwater City, the supply of goods to Northern Citadel had not been interrupted. It could be said that the waterway of the Red Sand River had become unusually prosperous. There were more than a dozen ships coming in and out every day. These towns and cities along the way were developing very quickly. Deepwater City also sent out a fleet to sail to the Southern Sea. This time, their destination was the Southern Sea. The Southern Sea was famous among the surrounding countries for its wealth. Every year, caravans and fleets from all over the world would trade here. The nobles of these countries could be said to have made a lot of money. The nobles of these countries lived more extravagantly than the nobles of Florence. Things like sugar, honey, high-end wine, perfume, and paper were in short supply here. All kinds of luxury goods produced in Northern Citadel could be sold at a high price here. From the very beginning of the sea trade, the goods traded were luxury goods. The risk of sea trade was much higher than that of caravans on the road. There was an endless stream of pirates, powerful sea monsters, and terrifying storms. As long as you encountered them, you would suffer heavy losses. If the value of the goods transported was low, you wouldn't even be able to pay the sailors' wages. The Southern Sea was also the most prosperous area for slave trade. Unlike the northern continent, the Southern Sea was very thoroughly developed. The land there was also developed. The large wastelands between the cities in the northern continent were rarely seen in the Southern Sea. The mild climate, abundant rainy season, and fertile land made the Southern Sea much more productive than the Northern Sea. There was enough food to feed a large number of people. Although the nobles here were greedier than the nobles in the Northern Sea, the population of the Southern Sea was still far greater than that of the Northern Sea. For example, the largest port in the Tudor Kingdom, the Spice Port, had a permanent population of more than 400,000. The capital of the Tudor Kingdom had a population of an astonishing 500,000. Including the floating population, the population had reached 800,000. Sulen planned to directly migrate from here. He would transport a large amount of goods from Northern Town City to the Southern Sea to sell, then buy slaves from here and send them to Deepwater City. This was much faster than migrating from the Kingdom of Florence. One ship could easily transport a few hundred immigrants, and one trip could transport at least 3,000 immigrants. Compared to the immigration of the Kingdom of Florence, it took much less money and time. The number of merchant ships in Deepwater City was still expanding. As the fleet grew bigger and bigger, so did the number of immigrants. Northtown City was rapidly developing again. Right now, the first problem that restricted the rapid development of Beifong Principality was its low population. The entire Beifong Principality had a population of no more than 300,000, which was even less than the population of a city. The population in the north of the Kingdom of Florence was originally insufficient, and the cost of immigration from the south was too high. Now, using a fleet for immigration would undoubtedly greatly reduce the cost, and there would be more people. The development of the waterway in Deepwater City was very smooth. All kinds of goods from Northern Town City were also very popular here. The immigration work in Northern Town City was also very smooth. The arrival of a large number of people also made Deepwater Port more prosperous. With a flash of light in the laboratory, Hathaway's eyes flashed with joy. She then excitedly picked up the freshly made Starry Sky magic robe on the alchemy table. This was a robe that she had specially made for herself. The main material was the skin of a white dragon, and it was also a legendary robe. After Sulan got his hands on a divine weapon, Hathaway couldn't help but take out the dragon skin to make a legendary robe. As a legendary wizard, Hathaway's equipment could be said to be very simple. Due to the lack of materials, she had always been using a grade 4 legendary robe and magic staff. Last time, Sulan brought back a large amount of legendary dragon skin, so she finally had enough materials. Hathaway directly put on the robe. The Starry Sky magic robe looked very beautiful. The robe was blue and white, and there were silver white patterns on it. The patterns were shining like stars, and it was very beautiful. Because it was made of dragon skin, the robe itself had very high defense. It could be said that with this robe, Hathaway's strength had increased by at least 3 times. With a flash of light, Alex's figure appeared on the astrology table. As soon as he appeared, he saw Hathaway and was attracted by the robe on her. "Sister Hathaway, you're done." Seeing the robe on Hathaway, Alex was also surprised. "Yes, I'm done. I just tested it, and it's already exceeded our expectations," Hathaway said excitedly. "Really? Then I'll make my robe according to this template." Alex decided right away. There are diagrams in the library. You can change the spells on them. Sulan brought back a lot of materials, so you can make a few more of them. Hathaway waved her hand and said. "Then I won't hold back." Alex said excitedly. "Right, how's your research going?" Hathaway suddenly thought of something and asked. "It's a lot worse. Sulan brought back a lot of information last time. I've already tested it. There's no problem at all," Alex said. "Look." Alex gently waved his hand, and a silver metal ring appeared in his hand. The metal ring was very small, only the size of a palm. It was engraved with countless arcane runes. The material of the metal ring was silver white, and there was a strong force flowing on it. "It looks good." Hathaway nodded and said. "This floating ring has only gone through a simple test. Further tests will require a lot of data to analyze." Alex didn't make this floating ring for the Wizard Tower, but for the floating city. Of course, this floating ring was only a model. The floating city's floating ring needed more power, and it also needed to be distributed to various parts of the floating city. This way, the floating city wouldn't break due to its own gravity. "Let's test it first." Alex nodded, and then Hathaway and Alex surrendered their gazes to the steel golem standing next to them. Hathaway gently waved her arm, and the heavy bodies of the steel golems flew up. The floating ring covered a very large area, 10 times larger than the previous one. The golems in this area all floated at the same height. This levitation ring had been modified to distribute the buoyancy evenly to the surroundings. It was specially made for the floating city. In the future, the floating city would definitely have more than one set of levitation rings installed. In order to prevent one set of levitation rings from malfunctioning, a floating city would have at least 3 to 4 sets of levitation rings installed. Once a levitation ring in operation had a problem and stopped working, a spare levitation ring would immediately restart. This was to prevent the floating city from falling from a high altitude. The 2 legendary wizards worked together and began to test the floating ring. As mana was continuously injected, the floating ring flickered with a faint spiritual light. A few steel golems moved around under the control of the 2 wizards. They moved up and down, left and right. The 2 of them quickly became familiar with the controls of the floating rings, recording their movements as they operated them. Experiment successful. Organize and archive the information about the floating ring. With the end of the test, Hathaway's hand flashed, and the floating ring slowly closed. The steel golems also slowly descended from the air. According to this ratio, a floating city weighing tens of thousands of tons or even hundreds of thousands of tons needs a floating ring 100 times larger, Alex said slowly. According to this ratio, we don't need enough materials now. The manufacturing process of the floating ring was very difficult, and the materials needed were also very precious. After all, it had to lift a city weighing hundreds of thousands of tons into the sky. There could not be any mistakes. Part of the metal used in the floating ring was mithril. In addition, it also needed a lot of alloys. This alloy was a special metal researched during the Arcane Empire, and its main purpose was to build a floating city. The two major cores of the floating city, the energy system and the floating ring system, were very important. Only sufficient energy could maintain the floating ring's operation. After solving the problem of the floating ring, the next thing was the elemental fusion furnace. The theory of the elemental fusion furnace had been perfected long ago, and even the elemental fission furnace had been officially used. However, it was not a simple matter to actually build an elemental fusion furnace. In fact, during the Arcane Empire, the elemental fusion furnace had been widely used. Compared to the intense radiation and pollution of the elemental fission furnace, the elemental fusion furnace had almost no radiation, and the energy output was hundreds or even thousands of times higher. The elemental fission furnace could also be used as the energy core of the floating city, but it required the elemental fission furnaces to form an energy matrix and rely on several elemental fission furnaces to provide sufficient energy. However, this method consumed several times more elemental fuel, and the endurance would be greatly reduced. Sister Hathaway, how's the research on the elemental fusion furnace? Alex asked as he put away the floating ring. Hathaway shook her head. There are still some problems. The elemental fusion furnace produces too much energy, and ordinary materials can't support it, but I already have some ideas. Chapter 613. Death Canyon. After Suluan had used mud to rock to block the entrance of the canyon, it had become an important resource and farming spot for northern Garrison City. At the entrance of the canyon, a military camp had been renovated. The new recruits from North Town would be sent here to kill zombies and skeletons to level up after completing their basic training. At the same time, they would collect all kinds of soul crystals. In this military camp, apart from the new recruits, there were 2 teams of Stage 3 elites. The leaders of these teams had reached Stage 4. In addition to protecting the new recruits, they were also responsible for killing the high-grade undead creatures in Death Canyon. There weren't many of these high-grade undead creatures. On average, there were about 5 of them per month. These high-grade undead creatures would produce high-grade soul crystals, which were the main material for making the soul cores of steel golems. Sulen now had a clay golem assembly line, a rock golem assembly line, and a steel golem assembly line. He had already moved the steel golem assembly line from the secret realm to the wizard tower. The steel golem assembly line was different from the clay golems and rock golems. The entire steel golem factory looked like a modern production workshop. The surrounding walls were bright and clean, and the crystal pipes on the ground were transmitting energy. These crystal pipes were connected to the elemental pool and the wizard tower. Although the wizard tower had an elemental fission furnace installed, Sulen didn't dismantle the elemental pool. Instead, he remade the elemental pool into an energy loop to power the wizard tower. The elemental fission furnace was used as the energy for the floating ring and the Enigma lock. The energy supply of the wizard tower was not interfered with. In fact, the energy supply of the wizard tower was like electricity in Abel's previous life. The energy supply of a wizard tower was equivalent to a power station. The production process of steel golems was much more complicated than clay golems and rock golems. At this time, the standardized parts of the steel golem assembly line were transported to the corresponding position by the conveyor belt. These parts were then assembled by the clay golems one by one. In the back of the warehouse, there were already a few steel golems that had been assembled standing quietly. These steel golems hadn't been activated yet, and their soul cores hadn't been installed. The soul cores of high-grade golems were very complicated, and they needed to be activated by wizards. Under normal circumstances, Sulen or Hathaway would come here once a month for activation. Soul crystals were rare and were one of the common currencies in the multiverse. Souls were a special kind of wealth, and the Death God maintained that the souls in the multiverse would not be excessively plundered. He would send a large number of souls back to the origin sea for reincarnation, but there would always be many devils and demons who wanted to challenge the death god's bottom line. In order to obtain large amounts of soul crystals, wizards created the soul-binding spell. After killing an enemy, they would use the soul-binding stone to bind the enemy's soul and imprison it in a magic gem or other crystals. Demons and devils loved soul crystals. In the lower planes, soul crystals had an astonishing purchasing power. A legendary soul crystal was enough to hire a group of greater demons to serve you. As for demons, they preferred to rob rather than trade. The lowest level of soul crystals were gray soul crystals, which mostly came from low-level undead creatures such as ghosts and skeletons. They had a very low chance of dropping these low-level soul crystals, which could be used to activate the clay golem. The price of such a soul crystal was about 2,000 kinnar. Ordinary people would not drop soul crystals after death. Even if they used the soul-binding spell, they could only obtain incomplete soul crystals. Dozens of the smallest soul crystals required at least grade 1 professions. Sulen planned to build the Golem Legion. The main combat power of the Golem Legion was the Steel Golem. Making the Steel Golem not only required the use of living constructs but also the use of limited wishes. The Steel Golem's intelligence was already very high. Clay golems and rock golems were now on sale. These clay golems and rock golems were absolutely loyal soldiers. They were strong and fearless of death. As long as they had energy, they would fight to the last quarter of an hour. In addition to fighting, the clay golems and rock golems could also do all kinds of heavy work. They had infinite strength and were much more useful than humans. Sulen planned to place some rock golems at the dock of Deepwater City and let them guard the port. These rock golems were more suitable for guarding than humans. They would not accept bribes. As long as they were given an order, they would carry it out meticulously. The port could be said to be the most prone to disputes. Most of the time, the guards could not be fair, but the rock golems could. The clay golems and rock golems sold in the northern citadel were not cheap. Moreover, the golems needed to be recharged every once in a while. So, although many people coveted the golem's powerful strength, there were not many who really wanted to buy them. Of course, Sulen also promised that there would be after-sales service for those who did not have the technology to recharge the golems. They only needed to spend a small amount of money to have the northern citadel recharge their golems. For the sake of publicity, Sulen also specially formed 2 teams of rock golems in the northern citadel. These 2 teams of rock golems would patrol the city every day. Compared to the warriors of the northern citadel, these 3-meter-tall rock golems were more oppressive. While Sulen was promoting the golems, a merchant ship slowly sailed in from the southern sea. The ship looked like it had gone through a great battle. There were many burning holes in the sails, and the blood stains on the deck had not been cleaned up. Not far away, a few sailors were carrying a corpse, planning to throw it into the sea. On the other side of the deck, a sailor was holding a Bible with a damaged cover and praying farewell. This was a sailor's funeral. All the corpses had to be thrown into the sea. The space on the ship was limited. After the corpses rotted, they would contaminate the food on the ship. If they were not careful, the whole ship would turn into a ghost ship, and everyone would die. After the prayer, 2 sailors threw the corpse into the sea. The waves splashed, and the smell of blood spread in the sea. Soon, people saw sharks in the distance rushing over. They swallowed the corpse. The ship steadily docked at the dock. Soon, a team of soldiers quickly walked to Sulen's room. "You said the fleet was attacked by pirates?" Sulen's eyes flashed coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty. We have 4 ships in total. 3 of them were taken away. This is the only ship left. Please help us get the ship back." Pirates had already set their sights on this place. Sulen's face was expressionless. He was thinking about how to make an example out of them. Chapter 6:14. The atmosphere in Deepwater Port was a little tense. In the morning, a ship docked and brought back news of a pirate attack. 3 ships in the fleet were intercepted by pirates, and the only ship that escaped suffered heavy casualties. The consequences for Deepwater City, which had just begun to develop, were very serious. "Where is Barbassa?" Sulen asked. "Your Majesty, Barbassa is training with the fleet and hasn't returned yet," Mayor Holland said. Sulen frowned slightly and continued, "How long do they expect to be back?" "Barbassa and the others usually carry a week's worth of food when they are training. They should be back tomorrow," Holland said. "When they return tomorrow, tell him to see me immediately." Sulen said, "Immediately inform all the crew and sailors in Deepwater Port to gather. All leave is cancelled. Everyone will gather at the port tomorrow morning." "Okay, now go and arrange it immediately." "As you wish." The surrounding officials bowed and said, then slowly left the room. "Go and call that merchant. I have something to ask him." The attendant next to him left quickly. About 10 minutes later, the attendant brought the merchant over. "How many pirates attacked you? Where did they attack? What is the name of this pirate?" Sulen glanced at the merchant and asked directly. "Your Majesty, the pirates who attacked us should be one-eyed. The skull on their pirate flag is one-eyed. This is the symbol of one-eyed. At that time, we were attacked by 4 pirate ships. There were at least 1,000 pirates. They disguised themselves as merchant ships and suddenly launched an attack on the Norman Islands. We were caught unprepared and the 3 ships were quickly occupied by the pirates. If it wasn't for a sudden whirlwind that scattered the pirates' formation, we wouldn't have been able to break through the siege. Your Majesty, this time our caravans suffered heavy losses. The goods and ships robbed added up to at least 500,000 knar. Please avenge us," Rhodes said with a pained expression. "How much do you know about one-eyed pirates? How many pirates are there? Where are they active?" Sulen asked in a deep voice. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I don't know much about one-eyed pirates. After all, pirates hide their tracks except when they rob," Rhodes said. "Then tell me what you know." Sulen nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." Rhodes reorganized his words and said, "It is said that there are 1,000 one-eyed pirates and they are one of the largest pirates in the southern seas. They are ruthless and never leave anyone alive after a successful robbery. That is why very little information about them has been leaked. One-Eye's flagship is the Black Dragon, an armed merchant ship. It is said that a wizard has cast a spell on this ship that can raise a large fog on the surface of the sea. There were a few times when One-Eyed was ambushed by the Tudor Kingdom's navy and was trapped in a tight encirclement. Thick fog suddenly rose from the sea and turned everything white in a breath. Almost nothing could be seen beyond 3 meters. One-Eyed took the opportunity to escape. After his escape, One-Eyed began to attack the Tudor Kingdom's merchant ships, causing the Tudor Kingdom to suffer heavy losses. Later, the Tudor Kingdom's navy launched a search and fought with this group of pirates many times. One-Eyed suffered heavy losses after a few times. 3 out of 5 pirate ships were sunk, so he had to give up. However, the Tudor Kingdom's navy did not gain any advantage. However, this incident also made him famous among the pirates and made him one of the most powerful pirates in the southern seas. One-Eyed is often active in the area of the Marin Islands, which is a route to the eastern continent. Merchant ships often pass through it, but this time, for some reason, he suddenly appeared in the Norman Islands and launched an attack on us. After listening to Rhodes's introduction, Sulen had some understanding of One-Eye's pirates. They were meticulous, well-informed, cruel, fierce, and vengeful. At the same time, they were also bold. After all, not many pirates dared to go head-to-head with the navy. However, One-Eyed had actually gone head-to-head with the navy more than once. Not only was he not eliminated, but he was also getting stronger and stronger. Sulen actually did not care much about the strength of One-Eye's pirates. After all, to him, anyone below the legendary level was just an ant. As long as he was willing, he could single-handedly destroy all of One-Eye's pirates. However, the reason why pirates could not stop attacking despite repeated prohibitions was because they were secretive about their whereabouts. The sea was vast and there were many islands. Pirates usually built their nests in some sea areas far away from the sea route. The most difficult thing to eliminate pirates was not to defeat them, but to find their nest. Even if Su Len knew that One-Eye's pirates were behind it, it was still very difficult to find them. However, it was not impossible. If there was no other way, he could ask Hathaway for a divination. The strength of One-Eye's pirates was far from the legendary level. The difference in strength was very large. This kind of divination would require too much effort. After a day of preparation, a large number of sailors gathered at the port of Deepwater City. All the sailors in the city had arrived, and there were also 2 ships docked at the port. Because 3 ships were robbed by pirates, there were only 2 ships left in Deepwater City. In addition, there was a warship that was still being piloted by Barbossa. Its strength was far inferior to One-Eye's. Of course, this did not take into account the situation of Raging Dragon. The sky gradually brightened, and soon a black spot appeared on the sea. The black spot was very fast, and it was revealed in a short time. It was the naval warship led by Barbossa. At this time, the warship had just completed sailing training and was moving towards the port. About half an hour later, the ship docked at the port. After seeing the situation at the port, Barbossa was slightly stunned. Then, as if he had thought of something, his face became a little dignified. "Your Majesty, what happened?" Barbossa hurried to Su Len and asked nervously after saluting. "Our fleet was attacked by One-Eye's pirates, and only 1 ship escaped," Su Len said with a gloomy face. "Now take your people, replenish the supplies, and immediately set out to find these pirates. I want to completely eliminate them." "Yes, Your Majesty." Barbossa's heart trembled, and he immediately said. Then, without caring about the repairs, he ordered the coolies to carry the supplies to the ship. Because the development time of Deepwater City was very short, the number of sailors here was not many. Although Su Len spent a lot of time to train them, it was still not enough. In addition, 3 ships were robbed, the sailors on them would certainly not survive. The quality of the sailors was much worse than before. Most of the sailors in front of him were ordinary people, or strong ordinary people. Su Len did not have much hope for these people. For him, the role of these sailors was to carry the spoils of war. Soon, Barbossa carried all the supplies. After making sure that all the ships were ready, Su Len said directly, "Let's go." The 3 ships quickly raised their sails, and then lined up in a column and slowly sailed out of the harbor. After leaving the port, the fleet changed direction and sailed directly to the south. What others did not know was that in the dark sea, a huge shadow was following closely under the sea. It was Sullen's magic ship, the Angry Dragon. Although they did not know the lair of the One-Eyed pirates, they would definitely sell the stolen goods after robbing the fleet. Ordinary port pirates would not dare to dock at all, and ordinary merchants would not dare to do this business. However, there was a place that specialized in this, and that was the Shipwreck Harbor. The Shipwreck Harbor was a pirate harbor that provided various services for pirates. The Shipwreck Harbor was hidden in countless islands in the Southern Sea. Not only could ships be repaired here, but there were also taverns, blacksmiths, and brothels. Most of the pirates in the Southern Sea dealt with their spoils here. In addition to pirates, there were also various smugglers. As long as you had money, those smugglers would even dare to sell warships. This was also the treasury of most pirates. After robbing, those pirates liked to come here to relax. It could be said that the prosperity of this harbor was not worse than ordinary ports. Although Su Len did not know the specific location of the Shipwreck Harbor, Barbossa, as a former pirate captain, naturally knew the location of the Shipwreck Harbor. Therefore, he led the fleet directly to the Shipwreck Harbor. The attack of the One-Eyed pirates also made Su Len realize the danger that Deepwater City was facing. After opening the channel, not only would there be caravans coming, but there would also be pirates eyeing this place. According to the current strength of Deepwater City, it would be very difficult to protect this channel. At present, Deepwater City only had Barbassa's navy, and the number of people was less than 300. It was impossible to ensure the safety of the channel. Therefore, to ensure the safety of the channel, Sulen needed to use some other methods. The simplest and most violent method was to establish his power and directly eliminate a few pirates with thunderous means. This way, other pirates would be deterred. Sulen was very clear about what pirates were. These guys were brave, ruthless, cruel, and greedy. They seemed to be very difficult to deal with. In reality, pirates were all a bunch of wretched wretches. They knew how to steer according to the wind. As long as you were strong enough and your fists were hard enough, they would know what humility was. Those who were disobedient would be chopped to death, and the rest would be obedient. The rule of bandits was the law of the jungle. They had no so-called loyalty. Betrayal could be said to be a common occurrence. As long as you were strong enough to lead other pirates to rob gold, silver, and jewelry, then these pirates would support you. However, if you could not lead them to gain benefits, then the pirate group would quickly fall apart. Your Majesty, do we go directly to the shipwreck harbor? Barbassa asked. Yes, go directly to the shipwreck harbor. Sulen said in a deep voice. Your Majesty, there is no problem going to the shipwreck harbor, but there is a rule in the shipwreck harbor. Fighting is not allowed in the shipwreck harbor. Barbassa reminded. What if we fight? Sulen sneered. If we fight, we will be wanted by the pirates, and all the pirates will attack us. Barbassa swallowed and said, You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.